I will open. First of all, we have a lot to cover in this meeting, so I am going to, for the most part, try to keep things moving along as efficiently as possible. But I will take a moment to open the meeting to recognize Gloria Tanner. So Gloria Tanner is a teacher in the high school who passed away this past week. She lived in town for quite a while and taught a lot of our kids. She taught my kids, I know that. And she's presence that will be sorely missed at the schools. So we will take a moment and have a moment of silence for Gloria Tanner. All right. So we usually have an opportunity for people who want to make a comment for any item that's not on the agenda. If anybody does want to make a comment for something which is not on the agenda tonight, raise your hand in Zoom and I will recognize you. I ask you to be very brief with your comments. All right, so we will move along. Item number 1 on the agenda is committee interviews for John Judge for the Conservation Committee Commission and Sheila Linehan for Open Space and Recreation Committee. So I think I'm going to take them in order. John Judge first. Mr. Judge, if you would be so kind as to unmute yourself if you're here and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit, tell the board a little bit about yourself. So, Mr. Judge, we can't hear you if you're on a phone. I will briefly unmute folks on the phone and see if I pick up one of your phone numbers. Nope, I don't appear to be getting it. All right, well, let's, in the meantime, move on to Sheila Linehan. Sheila, I think I saw you in here.
Yes.
So if you could introduce yourself.
Okay. I thought I had to contact by phone because I couldn't hear anyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No, I can't hear you.
Yes, we can.
I was on with my phone and I was getting an echo. So let me try the phone again.
Oh, you're great right now.
I know. Just go to
We can hear you just fine. So
with
that, we're good.
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Okay.
Oh, maybe not.
7 1 9 1 3 5 6 8 7. Yeah, I don't know. Okay. Oh God, there's a terrible echo.
Well, if you want to turn off the microphone on, if you're using the phone so you can hear us, then you can turn off the microphone on your computer. If you're using both of those things, and it should help.
Well, the microphone it's off on my computer.
So. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to mute you on your computer and see if we can still hear you. You there? Well, you can hear us and we can't hear you.
We could hear her fine on the computer, right?
Yeah, we can hear her
Yeah.
fine on the computer. But she
Okay.
can't-
Does that work?
Yep.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Yeah, I had to go back to another setting in my computer, which I've never had to use before, but sorry for the delay.
All right, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and we'll move on.
Okay, so those of you that have been on for a while probably remember I did apply for a post on the Conservation Committee some time ago when there was an opening. Fortunately for the Conservation Committee, there was somebody with more experience than I had. I'm interested in that, but as I told you folks, I wasn't real experienced in it, except that my husband was on it and I'd learned a little from him. In the meantime, because of I met Olga Hayes, who is on that committee and is also on the Open Spaces Committee. And we have been talking, and she thought that because of my interest in Manchester and the spaces, that I might be a good candidate for the Open Spaces Committee and Recreation Committee. So the position has become available, and I read up on what they do, and I just really think I'd like the opportunity to help them in their endeavors. I mean, if anybody has specific questions, my work history is actually in healthcare. I spent, I'm still spending 40 years at BI Deaconess Medical Center. I'm now in IT there, but I retired from full-time work 7 or 8 years ago and have been doing some volunteer work in other areas, including our library here in town. And I like the opportunity to help our community. So be happy to answer any questions.
Board members, I'll just start with Mr. Round.
Yes, that's good to meet you, Sheila. And I always look at enthusiasm and interest as the #1 criteria for any of these slots. Did you say you'd served in some other boards, or you'd looked into them but had not necessarily joined any?
Well, yeah, I mean, I had applied for a conservation board before, and then, and like I said, there were several candidates, some
Okay.
obviously more qualified. And so I met Olga through some of our
Okay,
other,
Hayes. Yep.
Mhm.
and
Okay.
so I don't know if Olga was here, but anyway, so we had talked at a couple of times during some of the meetings that we had that were public meetings for some conservation, and we just got to know each other. And she had known that I was interested in conservation and in open spaces, so she thought I'd be a good candidate. And after talking with her and looking at their minutes,
Okay.
I thought it'd be good.
Any particular projects or topics that are your pet projects at this point, or are you just going to get kind of familiar with what's going
I
on?
think I'd like to get familiar. I do know that there may be some work being done on the limited commercial district, and they're looking at open spaces over there. I think it's something that this committee could be really helpful with if it goes forward.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Harrison.
I gather that you think you have the time necessary to read and follow all of the discussions, some of which are going to be with other committees. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, that would be fine. I know that we have to interact with other parties when we're planning things and doing things. So yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, an awful lot of dinner time meetings.
Yes, I know. And I did talk to Olga about that because I do have several other dinner time meetings, and their monthly meeting. You think in the era of COVID, we all be sitting home with nothing to do, but a lot of my board meetings are during dinner time. But I do know that the regularly scheduled meeting for this one is on a night that I'm free. And I think that if you know in advance, you can schedule the time to be at these meetings.
Thank you. Sheila?
I'm sorry.
I
Just
was,
Jake.
Anybody else?
So-
Becky, your turn.
Oh, hi Sheila. Thank you very much for stepping up and offering. The questions I would have been answered, and I just want to say thank you very much for putting your
Yep.
name in.
Thank you.
Sheila, as for me, so what opinion, if any, do you have on where we stand with our open spaces and how we're using them in town?
I've been reading up on it. I just think that, I mean, I know that this was formed after the master plan. I really haven't got a real opinion on how we're using them. I know I've seen a few things about them, but I just think I need to get more familiar with what's going on. I am a big proponent of making them open to people with handicaps if that's necessary, and making them usable for the biggest amount of people that we can.
Mhm.
So.
Okie dokie. Jeff, why don't you go ahead?
Sheila, are you aware that the Open Space and Recreation Committee is in the process of updating a 7-year plan for open space in Manchester?
No, I wasn't aware of that. I mean, in my discussions with Olga, it didn't come up. I certainly would be happy to participate in that as far as making it relevant to what we're doing now.
Okay. I think if you go to the town website and look, you'll find that there's been some public meetings and there's also a committee that's been working to update that along with a consultant from the state of Massachusetts. So
I was looking at the website, but I guess I missed some of that stuff. I've been trying to get into that committee and look at the agendas and the minutes.
okay. I'll try and send you a link to direct you to that.
That would be terrific.
Okay, any other comments or questions from the board members right now? All right, well, thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight, Sheila.
Thank you.
We will get back in touch with you. We'll be making our decision on this next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Sheila.
See, we have Mr. Judge here now. So, Mr. Judge, if you could, we did. Mr. Judge.
You see
Oh,
me?
there it is. We can see you
Thanks.
and I.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having trouble with my link tonight,
That's okay.
but thanks for chatting with me.
Well, thank you for coming. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? We have your resume, but we'd like to hear it in your words, and then we'll go around the board for some questions.
Sure. I live in Old Neck Road, and I am married to Molly and father to Caroline, 4-year-old, and feel very fortunate to be in Manchester and also have the beautiful woods around us and the open space that you were just talking about. It's one of the most beautiful towns in America, and we're very fortunate to have the natural resources and the wilderness areas, from the woodlands to the beaches. We're a mini New England landscape. My full-time role is for almost 10 years. I've been the CEO of AMC, or the Appalachian Mountain Club. We're America's oldest conservation organization. Have about 16,000 volunteers, including quite a few folks from Manchester who are volunteers and members and donors. And we do work from Maine to DC, everything from conservation research, conservation advocacy work, to managing a pretty robust overnight lodging program, a little over 100 facilities, backcountry campsites, front country lodges. And prior to this, I was the chief city planner, chief of city planning and economic development for the city of Springfield, where I oversaw the Conservation Commission, affordable housing, homelessness, inspectional services, economic development. So I appreciate being considered and open it up to any of you for questions.
Mr. Round.
Hello, John. How are you doing?
Hi, John. Well, thanks.
Good, good. Well, I think we've all perused your background. I don't know that any one of us could write a better background for the Conservation Commission than what you bring to the party here. We need some guidance in that particular a role. I think is some major decisions and advice is going to be needed for some of the projects that are coming up. I guess my only question would be, and I can see that you would certainly be contributed. You've got a lot of perspective and would be able to contribute in so many different ways. You're a CEO of the AMC. That's got to take a little bit of time. And I'm just wondering, this group I think meets once a month, sometimes twice a month. Obviously everything is Zoom. Can you work that into your schedule?
Yeah, I mean, having Zoom is such a blessing in that regard, where you can really fit it in. Yeah, it's an intense role, and as you can imagine, it has been even more intense, like for all of you during the past few months, to run an organization with hundreds of employees spread around, 12 states. But most of that happens during the day. I do have evening meetings, but I did speak at length to Chris today, and you're right, John. It's a once a month kind of commitment, and she was talking about some site visits. For instance, there's one coming up this Wednesday around the proposed 40B site, just talking about the delineation of wetlands. So I'm fortunate that I'm working from home in Manchester, so that makes the site visits easy, and Zoom for evening meetings I think is pretty doable too, because again, it's once a month. It's pretty manageable.
Good, good. Well, thank you. We certainly we're all very happy that you've raised your hand and want to contribute in some way for the betterment of our town. So great.
Thank you.
Ann Harrison. And you're muted.
I'm working on that.
There you go.
Yeah, that was a good idea. The town has for many years been divided to a certain degree between those people who want nothing to change and those people who would like to see some commercial development to reduce the burden on the property tax. You have an overwhelming resume, but it's sort of overwhelming in one side. How open are you to finding compromises that would let some commercial development occur in places that are not currently developed?
Yeah, I think we will always have that, obviously, push-pull. We're fortunate, very fortunate in so many ways that we've got, we have it on both sides. Developers do want to locate here, including, I know there's talk about more office development, talk about, of course, residential and 40B. But my background as a city planner and economic development person, I very much think it has to be, you can't have one, you can't have a town that doesn't have a sustainable budget because you've preserved every piece of land in the town. So I'm a conservationist, but working for AMC, we do sustainable forestry, for instance, and people say to me all the time, how can you cut down trees? And we do it in a very sustainable way. We own about 100,000 acres up in Maine. So I think, Ann, coming to the table with reasonable conservation requests, strong guidelines so developers know what to expect, and then a willingness to create a community benefits package that keeps the public connected to those lands. So, in the case of 40B, I'm sure there'll be quite a bit of private space for the people who are renting apartments, but where's the access to the rest of the conservation lands that make Manchester so great? So there's this, and then I think the third piece is this idea of resiliency and adaptation. And we have an incredible coastline, but I was, down in Masconomo on Saturday and playing soccer with my daughter, and the field was half flooded from the rains and from the high tide. So thinking about how do we use conservation lands for ecosystem services, I think is going to be an important question for us to ask too. So that could be a third leg of that stool, pure conservation development, and then what are we using for resiliency?
And it's still.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That's a very nice balance.
Becky.
Hi, John. Thank you very much for wanting to get involved in the town. I'm always so pleasantly surprised to see how many people in this town do get involved. I guess at this point, my biggest question for you is occasionally some decisions need to come down that are not always favorable for a landowner.
Mhm.
And I would imagine with your background, you've come up against things that don't please people before. But this is a small town and we all do live in close proximity, obviously. It's just something that anybody doing a volunteer job as we are, should be ready to accept a little bit of pushback sometimes. And I just wanted to bring that up and make sure you were fully aware of the fact that can happen, especially in the position you would be.
Right. No, I can imagine, in my role in Springfield, there wasn't the amount of NIMBYism that you would think would happen in a more affluent town, and people were very welcoming of economic development. But then there were also meetings where we'd have 300 people that would show up to oppose something. So I think you have to be tough-skinned, but at the same time, being open to listen and learn and do your homework too. So I think regardless of where the decisions come down, I think just standing firm and being resolute and saying, okay, this is why we made these decisions, and we made them with the best information we had. And if you're not leaving roses at my front doorstep, I understand. But you're right. You have to be prepared for that, Becky, in terms of some of these aren't going to be the most popular decisions, especially when you're thinking about conservation. We're not handing out checks. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, John. Very, very thoughtful answer, and it shows. I mean, I would imagine with between AMC, Springfield, and everything else in between, you've had a sufficiency of experiences.
Thanks.
Jeff? You're muted, Jeff.
Just so you know, John, if they do leave you roses, you have to declare that as a gift, and perhaps even return it. I have no questions. I can see that you have a breadth of qualifications for this, and I look forward to working with you.
Great, thank you.
So John, thanks for coming in tonight, virtually. Lots of super strong qualifications, obviously. But how familiar are you with the current set of conservation land in Manchester? The approaches that we're taking to the conservation land? Well, that's my first question.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar, other than, you know, trying to do my best to discover the lands around us, and discover new lands every weekend. So that's been a joy. I was talking to some of our neighbors who've been here for over 20 years, and they just, for the first time, discovered some conservation lands and in town. So I think, you know, there's a big opportunity there to say, you know, I'm in the trail building business, the wayfaring business. You know, we maintain about 2,000 miles of trails. So thinking about interpretive trails and trail signage, and educating the public like me about, hey, this is what we have available. And we have one of the, you know, the biggest portfolios of protected lands and open space and conservation lands for a town our size. You know, it's really impressive. And, you know, living across from Hillary and Al, the late Al Creighton, and I know all the great work that they've done in town, that Manchester Essex has done in town. And, but thinking about, you know, educating our own citizens, and, you know, I'm certainly interested in taking some of the training that Chris said is available on wetlands. I had to work with the Army Corps of Engineers in moving wetlands. And so while I've had quite a bit of experience in a city, I would like to have a refresher course and just figure out what are the key battles and constraints, and funding challenges as well. I've got some interesting ideas on that front.
Okay. Well, you, with some fortune, managed to answer one or two of my other questions with that one answer. And I was going to talk about quasi-judicial aspects of the board, but it's pretty clear that you're familiar with that from your previous experience on other municipalities. So I'll leave it there for tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's it for me. Any other board members have any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming in tonight, and we will vote on these positions next meeting, and we'll give you the results.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you all. Thanks for your consideration, and thanks for your volunteer work. I'm grateful for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
All right, let's go on to item 2 on the agenda. These are committee appointments for 2 people that we interviewed 2 meetings ago. To speed this up, this is for Leslie Beatty and on the Welcome to Manchester Committee, and Lee Scharf for the Sustainability Committee. Kind can I get a motion from somebody to appoint Leslie Beatty to the Welcome to Manchester Committee and Lee Scharf to the Sustainability Committee?
So moved.
Moved.
Second.
All right, so I'm going to call that with Becky Jakes of the motion and Jeff for the second. Any discussion? All in favor? Roll call vote. Mr. Round,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
Ms. Jakes,
Yes.
Mr. Bob Return,
Yes.
Mr. Bowling votes yes. All right, moving on, item number 3 on our agenda, proposed tree policy discussion. Greg, do you want to introduce this?
Sure. Thank you, Eli. Good evening, everybody. So we have been working with Friends of Manchester Trees on some new tree policies to help us, to guide us in our care of our public shade trees, those trees along the roadways primarily, also trees on our parklands, et cetera. And so we've gone through a number of iterations. And this last version that we have in your package is sort of a compromise between a more formal set of policies and bylaw that we might want to do down the road, and less formal. This is sort of a compromise in between the two. And I think working with Friends, that they feel pretty good about this version. I think the probably the biggest issue before you that you need to focus on is that 11-foot setback. So we're assuming in this proposal that the right-of-way extends 11 feet beyond the current pavement as a general rule. We don't always know exactly where our legal deeded described right-of-way lies. The road is there, and then we own lands typically on either side of the road. Sometimes roads are in the middle of that right of way, sometimes they are not. Sometimes they are shifted to one side or the other. And being a town that dates back to the 1600s, we don't always have the most accurate records on those precise layouts. So this approach makes the assumption that we have that 11 feet beyond the pavement. However, it allows, if a landowner can prove otherwise, then we can adjust accordingly. It also notes that if there are sort of hard boundaries, like a stone fence, stone wall, I should say, or a fence that has recently been permitted or has been permitted in the past, that we assume that that is the edge of the town right of way, and therefore trees on the other side, the back side, if you will, of the wall or the fence are not town trees. Again, an assumption we make unless proven otherwise, and if somebody can bring the evidence to us. So that's probably the biggest policy issue for you here. Otherwise, it really outlines the duties of the tree warden, taking primarily from the statutes and elaborating on that a little bit. Outlines the process whereby if we're going to consider removing a town tree, there needs to be a public hearing. That's been your practice in the past, and it continues. This policy continues that practice. So I think it's up for you to review this and have one more discussion. I believe you have indicated in the past that you wanted to have a finance committee weigh in just to get their input on the proposal before making it final. And assuming that you're comfortable with the wording that you see tonight, we can move forward with that final step and then come back for you for official adoption of the policy.
Comments from the board?
I have a question for Greg.
Go ahead, John.
So, Greg, this 10-foot, 11-foot thing seems to be the critical issue as you've described. Have we struggled right now? I guess it's generally been treated as 10 feet, correct?
Well, it was.
It was, and then went to 5. Okay.
Most recently, it's been only 5.
Okay. Have we struggled with that 5 foot? Is there too much stuff going on or too little, or has this been an issue? I'm just wondering about the difference between 5 feet and 10 feet or 11 feet, if that's going to increase the number of inquiries, things that we're gonna have to deal with by, I don't know, some factor.
Right, so I guess the best way to answer that is we're plenty busy with the 5 feet.
Okay.
I mean, unfortunately, there's a bit of a backlog. You know, the health and care of the public trees. You know, it's fair to say that they haven't gotten the attention perhaps that they should have over the years. So we do have a backlog of trees that need pruning or taking down because they're a danger or they're no longer healthy. But having said that, when it was the 10-foot rule, you know, it was working. And I think from a you know, public policy perspective, that extra footage allows some better control of the trees along the roadways. So it is a bigger corridor, obviously, and I think most people would be in favor of that broader corridor.
And the way the wording is right now, things only come before the selectmen if there is a tree removal. For trimming and whatever else related to that, that's strictly between the warden and whoever the property owner is.
Right. Obviously, if there's a conflict and there's not agreement,
okay. Yeah.
People can come to the board under appeal, basically.
Right.
But typically, yes, you would only get involved when we're talking about a tree removal.
Okay.
If I may, this version has eliminated most of my concerns. I have a technical, there's a definition of historic trees.
Or heritage tree.
Heritage, right.
Yeah.
And there is a declaration that heritage trees are covered by the policy, but at no point is anything specifically said about heritage trees, other than defining them and saying that the policy, but specifically, if you want to take down something, heritage trees are not listed.
They are
Okay, sorry, missed it.
in 1G,
1G, okay.
line 1.
Mhm.
So tree removal does include heritage trees. So anytime when you see tree removal, it does apply to the heritage trees.
2G.
2G, that's.
Excuse me, 2G.
Yeah.
It's also 1G. It does say 1G as well.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right, 2G.
Okay, 2G. This the definition is there a setback for heritage trees?
So no. So heritage tree is a unique tree. So any tree that is that large then qualifies as a heritage tree and falls under protection, and therefore, regardless of where it is, and therefore, if a heritage tree is slated, or a private owner wants to remove a heritage tree from their property, then they do need to get permission to do that.
Interesting.
So perhaps one of the friends on the line here can tell us. I don't know offhand how many heritage trees we have in town. I just don't have that. I don't have that in front of me.
No, I don't have it at my fingertips either. There have been a couple of tree inventories done, but if you'd like that answer, and we can get it for you by the next time we come before the board.
Thank you.
Becky, any comments?
I do actually. I was looking at number 4 where it's talking about activities requiring written approval by the town. And sort of looking at 4 and 6 in conjunction, where 6 is talking about pruning or removals under emergency situations. The last line under 6 says such officials shall complete a written record of any such determination and submit it to the tree warden within 14 days of such determination. So this is something, Greg can help me with clarification on that. In terms of an emergency and taking down a tree, that can be done by the tree warden, him or herself. But if there's 14 days, I'm just curious, either why we don't, or can we also have the Board of Selectmen weigh in on this? 14 days gives enough time for a Board of Selectmen meeting.
This implies something different. So if there's a huge storm and we have a public shade tree that's dangling, DPW can go in and remove that right away. They have 14 days to tell the tree warden that they had to take this tree down.
Okay, thank you. Because I'm reading through the Mass General Law 87.5 about that as well.
Right.
And the 14 days kind of confused me a little. All right, thank you. Right, and then my other, I had number 7 where we do not charge a fee for an application being submitted. Somebody has to process that paperwork. Somebody has to take time to go over any information. Should we not charge a nominal fee to cover that?
Yeah, we certainly can. You can strike that, and just as part of your annual fee schedules, you can determine what sort of fee.
I mean, I'm just curious. We're spending money to process this, and if we're trying to find ways to, where everything, even little amounts can add up, this might be a helpful one as well.
Sure. Candidly, this template originated from another town, and I think that just was a carryover from them. Okay,
and then my last comment was looking at number 10, tree replacement. And it talks about replacing a tree within 6 months. My concern with this, and I know this probably comes into play more significantly with something along the lines of over across from the high school, where we lost some trees after some development there. Is 6 months reasonable if we say are coming into late fall or early spring, even winter, where it might not be feasible or optimal to be replacing a tree at those times? Should we change it from just 6 months to 6 months, weather appropriate or conditions appropriate?
Yeah, you could put a qualifier in there. Yes, I think that would be.
I mean, does that make sense?
I think it's a really good point, Becky, and I would have no trouble making it 12 months, actually, because then you've got the flexibility and you don't have to add a lot of funny language.
Okay. And Sandy, what do you find I'm sorry, Eli, if I may ask Sandy a question. Do you find other towns charge fees for doing some of this work?
Oh, yes. But what we were trying to do, the big difference between this draft and the thing you've seen previously is this is a policy we wanted to try to get in writing what was happening sooner rather than later, so things were clear. And we didn't want to have to go through a town meeting process. Our
Yep.
understanding was fees, maybe not an application fee, but the fees that we had were not, we couldn't do that. So that's, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, from town council's point of view. So we took all the fees out, and the only penalty really that anyone has now is a requirement to replace.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff?
My only question is that there are, in number 5, there are a number of prohibited activities that involve topping and girding and cutting or poisoning tree roots, etc. When construction goes on someone's property and there's damage to the tree roots of a town tree, a heritage tree, what's the, I see all these prohibited activities, but I don't see any way of enforcing them. It concerns me because there were 2 trees on Masconomo that came down, that seemed to have come down, at least from the information that I've seen, from construction activities, causing damage to the trees that killed the trees. And not killed them, but damaged them enough so that they had to come down. So the trees are down. They're already down.
What's the remedy?
What's the
And
consequence?
these would have been heritage trees too.
They would have been heritage trees.
So I don't have a good short answer for you this evening. It's something we could take a harder look at and see if there's some models out there that we might be able to benefit from. I'm open to other comments.
May I comment?
Sure, go ahead, Sandy.
I think it's a really good point. And the way I read the whole scope of these 4 pages was that it's a prohibited activity. So it's the equivalent of a section 10 violation. So that, you know, if someone does something that causes essentially the death of the tree, then they're into having to replace it. And this is just, instead of whacking it with a car, this is if you kill it through other means.
Yep.
I think one of the challenges we have is that a lot of times that construction damage will take a number of years to be revealed.
Yeah.
And that's a hard one because you know, it's not always easy to definitively state, well, the tree has now died because of that construction activity 3 or 4 years ago.
Right.
And that's going to require a little bit more integration with the building department. That's that would be an interesting problem to take on, especially since we have lost a number of trees to this sort of behavior. But I don't think that it can be in the scope of this current policy update. Not without doing a considerable amount of additional work.
So I think, Sandy, you're correct that we do have some language here to fall back on. I think we need to do a little more thinking about how we document the health of trees. You know, if construction is being permitted, we need a process of identifying, okay, here are the trees and here are their current conditions, and documenting that so that we have something to go back on.
Yes. Yes.
Greg, can I ask you a question? Under the Commonwealth's law, which is this policy is being based on, is there any provision for requiring a construction bond when construction is going to potentially impact trees, and have that bond open for, as Eli said, 2 to 3 years afterwards?
I'll have to do a little homework on that, Jeff. I'm not sure, but let me find out.
Because that could be something that could be part of the building permit process for construction sites.
My favorite addition that the town council made to, to the whole draft here is section, and it's very much to Eli's point. It's section 3C. And it specifically references other town regulators, and that puts some responsibility on the planning board, the zoning board of appeals, et cetera. So it kind of knits it together in a good way, I think.
And I think in addition, just to that, I think it's incumbent upon us to be a lot more tree favorable going forward. I think we've kind of let certain activities take care of themselves for a number of years. And I think this is really important that we get back to taking care of this resource that is both a fiscal resource for the town as well as just natural and visual beauty.
Jeff, were you done? Did you have any more comments you had to make? I had two comments. One was actually a question about the fees for applications section. Was it anticipated that applications would be filed for making pruning requests?
Yes.
Okay. So my only concern about fees for filing applications there is we actually probably want to encourage people to make pruning requests so that we can identify trees that need help. And I'd have some concern about putting, barriers to entry and for those. So maybe carry fees and others might not. That's something that we could consider. And I don't want to try and chase it all the way down tonight. That's something that we follow up on later. The other question that I had, or comment that I had, was around the public hearing process. So in the past, the public hearing process has, to my knowledge, generally run through the town administration. It hasn't been specifically incumbent on the tree warden to issue the public hearing. Is that the case, or am I mistaken?
I'm sorry, Eli, I didn't quite follow all that.
So in the past, when we've had public hearings for tree removals, it's generally been the regular town administration that's post the public hearing, if I recall correctly. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So this policy, to some extent, seems to put more of that into the lap, if you read it one particular way, of the tree warden. And I don't know if that was the intent, or if that's just a fallout of it coming from existing policies and state language, and if that's something that we really want to do, because that actually is a fair amount of work for the tree warden to follow up on. And I wonder if that language is, I know we've edited it some, but I wonder if that's the language is where we really want it to be.
Yeah, we can take another look at that. So what we typically, the tree warden typically is the one who actually posts the notice on the tree itself. And we take care, when I say we, Sonia takes care of the, the details of noticing, public notice and getting it on the agenda, that sort of thing.
Okay.
But yeah, we could just take another look at that to make sure we're not unnecessarily saying it has to be the tree warden.
All right. Other than that, the basics of the policy, as far as I'm concerned, and the 11-foot number I'm okay with, in particular since I do think that after we moved to that 5-foot number, the 5-foot number was somewhat arbitrary. And I think there were a couple of cases subsequent to that where we had developers looking to remove trees, maybe did remove trees or do work on trees that fell outside that 5-foot range. And these were potentially shade trees. So I think that I support moving back to the original definition pending some analysis of the financial impact to the town. So I'm fine with forwarding this on modulo a few minor edits to the finance committee for their opinion on it. Do I have any other comments or questions from board members? Do I have support for that? Can we make a motion to move this policy on to the finance committee for their opinion?
So moved. I would agree with that.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All right, Mr. Round,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison. Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
Ms. Jakes,
Yes.
Mr. Bodmer-Turner,
Yes.
Mr. Bowling votes yes. All right. Friends of the Trees, thank you for your effort here. This has been taking a while, but this is also a good thing to take a while on.
Yes. Yes. Thank you all, and much appreciation to Greg and Chuck. I mean, it's been a pleasure to work with them and go back and forth and try and get the language right.
Thank you, Sandy.
You are welcome. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Planning board recodification update. Oh, I'm sorry. There actually were some questions and comments in the chat that I missed on the tree policy. So is there a provision for damage that a town tree causes to private property, such as tree root damage to sewer line? Greg?
So that's something that is sort of negotiated on case-by-case basis in terms of we don't have a set policy on that. And I don't know if I would put it in this policy. But if someone can make a claim, we usually, if it's traceable to a town tree, we have typically taken care of that.
All right, and we had a question that said regarding Masconoma Street, aside from shade or historical trees, trees on Masconoma impinge on telephone and cable wires. Wires actually rest on tree branches. How does the citizen get something done about conditions involving trees that involve possible interference with public access to telephone and internet? So utility interference, Greg said that utility interference can be a justifiable reason for trimming or even removal if it is necessary. In other words, it doesn't have to go through the same process for removal if it's actually going to take down utility lines. Is that correct? Or no, that's only for pruning?
Just for pruning. So if it was removal, you would have to come before you, but it is one of the reasons for deciding that something needs to be removed. A tree needs to be removed if indeed there's no other solution.
Yep. All right, moving on to the item number 4 on the agenda, planning board recodification update, etc. So this is going to be a presentation of the Board of Selectmen summarizing the changes and the general gist of the changes currently proposed for the zoning bylaws, which we will hopefully bring before town meeting at annual town meeting next year. Long needed update. We're going to have a presentation by Mark Bobrowski and summarizing some of the changes. We're also going to have a presentation on the accessory dwelling unit proposal, which is going to be publicly discussed. So the board will have some opportunity to ask general questions. We're not going to be diving into a line-by-line analysis of the bylaw revisions. We're going to be talking about them fairly broadly. Board will have opportunity to ask questions, and then there will be a couple of public forums following this, held by the planning board, going into greater depth on the changes, the proposed changes. Obviously, board members will be able to comment at those as well, hopefully culminating in these being brought to the annual town meeting. So with that, we're going to turn this over to Mr. Bobrowski.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Mark Bobrowski. I understand that the chairman of the committee has a few introductory words that he would like to say.
Oh, sorry, Ron. Go ahead, Ron.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Bowling. On March 26, 2019, the planning board began its effort to recodify and update the zoning bylaws. This effort was a recommendation of our 2019 master plan. The planning board engaged Mark Bobrowski, a partner in the firm Blattman, Bobrowski, and Haverty in Concord, Mass. Mark has been a land use lawyer for 30 years. His practice focuses on assisting clients in the public and private sectors with permitting, strategy, and decision-making, litigation, and appellate argument. His land use practice is statewide. He has worked in one capacity or another in half our communities, including the recodification of the ordinance and bylaws of at least 100 cities and towns in the Commonwealth. He's also recodified general bylaws, subdivision regulations, and administrative regulations in dozens of municipalities. The planning board, town planner Sue Brown, zoning chair Sarah Mellish, and building inspector Paul Orlando has met with Mark over 15 times in the past year and a half. In that period, the board has reorganized the bylaws, eliminated repetitive bylaws, eliminated illegal bylaws, consolidated bylaws, moved certain bylaws from zoning into general, redefined definitions, and added new definitions. As you are aware, this recodification and update initiative is an iterative process. Now that we have our initial changes memorialized, the planning board intends to hold public workshops and incorporate agreed upon changes to create a final draft. The planning board will then hold a public hearing and incorporate any additional changes. The final document will be brought to our town annual meeting for approval. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mark, who will summarize what we've been doing for the past year and a half.
Thank you, Ron. If I might, Mr. Chairman, I'll give you the nickel tour.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
So recodification typically is described as three things. First of all, it's an effort to bring the bylaw into consistency with changes in the law. That could be statutory reform or it could be case law. And over the course of the last 30 years, case law is as much of a driver as statutory change. So I keep up on all the cases every year because I have a book and I have to do a supplement. And whenever I see something that is interesting, I try to help towns fold it into their bylaws or ordinances. The second is to harmonize internal inconsistencies. And there are some things in your bylaw that fit that category. You had a couple of different site plan review provisions. One said go left with 5 spaces and the other one said go right with 10 spaces. So we tried to come to some agreement on what that all meant. And then lastly, it's to fill in glaring omissions. In your bylaws case, that meant as usual definitions, but it also meant that we would create a use table for the first time. You had a narrative bylaw in which there was a pyramid scheme. So the residence districts were described, and then the general district sort of piggybacked on that. The limited commercial district piggybacked on that. And for the first time now, there's a use table, a chart, if you will, that shows all of the districts together with uses categorized as either prohibited, allowed, or available by special permit. So I think that Sue and I worked hard last week on putting together both draft 4, which is color coded, and a 1-page cheat sheet called Major Changes. And if you have that information in front of you, I will go through the version which is labeled draft 4, dated October 16th, just last week. The idea here is to track the changes so that when somebody asks me or the committee members what the changes have been, anything in yellow stands out as being new text, strikeout is deleted text, and anything that's been preserved is just in regular black text. I would say that it's my experience that in most cases, roughly 75 to 80% of the existing ordinance or bylaw is preserved in the same form, usually renumbered, but in the same form as it existed before. So my usual custom is to go through the bylaw section by section, and I'll outline what I think are the major changes. And hopefully by the end, you'll have a picture of where the board is headed as we go through the process. I do want to warn you that I have a engagement with the Dartmouth, Massachusetts Planning Board. They've already pushed agenda items back till 8 o'clock so that I can accommodate my client. And I'm waiting with the text here to get a 5-minute warning, if you will, from my client. So we'll push on through that. So section 1 is what I typically call the handshake of the bylaw. There's not a lot of substantive law here. It's mostly just setting out the basics. You can see from section 1 that I incorporated many boilerplate provisions that I typically use all the time. And they replace things that have been strike out that you'll also see in section 1. But this sets the tone. The bylaw's purpose, its authority are spelled out. The provisions are clearly announced to work in concert with other bylaws, not replace or supersede other bylaws. To the extent the Conservation Commission has a local bylaw, for example, on wetlands regulations, that's still good. And you have to comply with both the zoning and the wetlands regulations of the CONCOM. The same would be true of general bylaws that have been adopted by town meeting over the years. Anything that's in effect has to be satisfied. Section 2, as we move into this, has one change. I don't know that it's major, but there was a simple residence district, a D district, and we've now made it into RD1 and RD2. The only difference between them is that 2-family dwellings and conversion of a single family to a 2-family dwelling are allowed in one district and by Board of Appeals special permit in the other district. It used to be in the existing bylaw, a proximity to a street. That's not really a district, so we just created something a little bit more legal to accommodate that difference. And that's the major change. Under the other sections of section 2, you can see that most of this is consistent with your existing bylaw. We did add a provision on split lots, and that would include by town boundary. So if a lot is in Manchester-by-the-Sea and Essex, for example, what are the rules? And then by zoning district boundary. And again, these are works in progress, so these are placeholders for the most part. But we have put in something that we agreed at least to be a placeholder at this time. In section 3, use tables are the subject. I hope that it's becoming clear that there's a chapter structure to the proposed bylaw. So when something new is adopted, I always pull my hair out when I see that a town has just added it at the end of the bylaw. That's not the goal here. The goal is that each chapter is expandable, and when something is adopted, it fits nicely into some existing structure. So as I said, the principal change here in section 3 on use regulations is that we now have adopted a table which outlines all the uses. And I believe that that's been given to you as a separate file, which is called Appendix A in this draft. We've also identified and codified some regulations with regard to accessory uses, scientific uses under 3.3.1.1 are referenced in the statute. You did not have anything about it, so we put something in. The same is true of family daycare homes. There's a regulation now that governs these for the first time. And then non-residential accessory uses and residential accessory uses, we put in some new provisions. For example, you had nothing to accommodate a contractor or a landscaper. And many of those businesses need to do some storage in the yard. These rules have been adopted to allow for larger parcels to accommodate these kinds of business people. Special permit would be required if it's not 2 acres or more. The same is true of overnight parking of commercial vehicles. The board labored mightily to decide that one commercial vehicle of less than 14,000 GVW could be allowed as a right, and larger vehicles or more than one of the said vehicles could be allowed by special permit. Didn't change the home occupation much. I just added a couple of new references to photographers and artists. Swimming pools, accessory structure. New rules were codified to allow for these swimming pools as of right, and that was an effort of the committee. And then lastly, a few accessory uses are prohibited, including commercial kennels, commercial auto repair or service as an accessory use, and storage of recreational vehicles in the setback area of the side or rear yard. In the dimensional regulations, we again created a table and updated it. That meant merging a couple of smaller tables and also adding the limited commercial district. Most of the edits here are relatively small and not terribly important. You'll see a couple of strikeouts. Those have been moved to definitions under section 4.2. I'm sorry, 4.1.4. There's a special exception that has been eliminated there. That was eliminated because it's not quite the wording that the statute has in Chapter 40A, Section 6, Paragraph 4, Sentence 1. That's a well-worn statutory route. Making up something new is not a good idea because there's no case law to define what Manchester thinks versus what happens in the rest of the state. So we reverted to the state regulations on point. And then ultimately, you'll see some references to accessory structures in 4.3. A table was created for the various districts and rules were spelled out in cooperation with Paul Orlando, the building commissioner, inspector of buildings, who helped us try to figure out what the code requires and what the existing regulations did as well. And you'll see a couple of prohibited accessory structures at the end. Section 5 is a recodification in its entirety of your rules regarding non-conforming uses and structures. This entire section is new, and it basically modifies the old regulations to bring it into consistency with case law. Here, case law is the driver, not so much statute. The legislature has no appetite for changing Section 6, but the courts do, and the courts have made enormous changes. So what we've said here is that non-conforming uses can be changed or substantially extended, or changed from one non-conforming use to another less detrimental non-conforming use, both by special permit. And non-conforming uses should be interpreted to mean everything but a single family or a two-family dwelling. And so we're talking about stores and offices and things of that sort. A non-conforming structure in 5.3 can be reconstructed, extended, or structurally changed, or altered to provide for a substantially different purpose. Those are both called out in the statute, and we've chosen those items because it's consistent. Variance required indicates that a non-conforming structure will require a variance when the existing non-conformity is extended or exacerbated. And that's consistent with the holding in Rockwood versus Snow Inn Court. Non-conforming single and two-family structures are the real beneficiary here. They are distinguished in the statute. A non-conforming single or two-family residential structure can be changed provided that it doesn't increase what the statute calls the non-conforming nature of the structure. Nobody knows what that means. There's been a couple of cases to try to define that. What we've done is basically say that the following permissible changes in 551 are not deemed to increase the non-conforming nature of the structure. So if the lot's deficient in area, it's the structure that's non-conforming. But if the addition complies with all setback, yard, building coverage, and height requirements, you get a building permit. You don't need a special permit. Same is true for a lot with insufficient frontage. And the same is true when the lot encroaches in one side yard, but the alteration is in the other, and it complies with those dimensional requirements. Now, the one cap on that would be that if the structure is changing by more than 100% increase in the gross floor area, then that too would require a special permit. That's basically putting a second floor on a ranch. And the idea there is that if the house is tripling in size, your neighbors probably need a public hearing, and you ought to have one. Doesn't mean the answer is no, it just means that the answer is going to come after a public hearing at the Board of Appeals. Continuing on in that section, we've indicated that abandonment and non-use, first of all, has been expanded for a period of 3 years. It was 2 in your older bylaw, but the legislature said that 3 years is now permissible. So that's what we chose. And even if you've not used the property for more than 3 years, by special permit from the Board of Appeals, it may be reestablished. Sometimes insurance coverage is slow to kick in, and other times valuable structures are lost because change in the economic climate simply prevents this from happening in a timely fashion. It doesn't have to come back, but by special permit, it may come back. I live in Concord under section 5.7. We are the capital of teardowns, voluntary. So the question raised here is, under what procedures can somebody knock down their existing home and rebuild it? The answer is pretty straightforward. The building can be reconstructed, any building, not just a house, but the proposal here is that it can be as of right on the same footprint and the same gross floor area. But if you're moving the footprint or increasing the gross floor area, you need a special permit. So that allows the Board of Appeals to try to fit the house into the neighborhood. And then a couple of cleanup provisions here. Substandard lots, if you're swapping a triangle of your property with a triangle of somebody else's property, as is often the case when people want to avoid needing a variance for a reconstruction in a side yard, and the change does not result in an increase of nonconformity, you can go ahead and do that as of right without getting a variance. And if your property is a victim of eminent domain, you're going to be treated as a nonconformity after that is completed. So that's a total rewrite. I have to say that I've put the majority of those provisions, if not the vast majority, in about 75 towns at this point, and nobody's calling me. So I'm comfortable that they really work well to make the building inspector, the Board of Appeals, and the homeowner's job a whole lot easier. Didn't change much of the parking regulations. We did add a provision for compact spaces in section 6.1.2. Probably the most important changes at the end in section 6.1.7. If I want to vary the parking on my lot, let's say that I'm in the LCC district and the parking chart calls for me to have 36 spaces, but I know I'm never going to need 36 spaces. I can apply for a special permit to reduce the asphalt to some reasonable number agreed upon by the special permit granting authority or the planning board. And the thinking there is that otherwise I would need a variance. Variances are predicated upon soil conditions, shape, or topographical features. Special permit is a jump ball. And if it's better than it is bad, a special permit can be granted. So why not just eliminate the nonsense? Because most people who would need a variance in that situation would simply have to cover their bases by making something up about soil conditions, shape, or topography. A special permit's a much cleaner way to do that. The same is true with regard to 6.2 and signs. If you have a need for larger signs or more signs, 6.2.5 would give you a special permit option to ask for that through the special permit granting authority or the planning board. Section 6.3 is new on landscaping and screening. It basically requires large parking areas to be screened, and then fences, retaining walls are regulated, unsightly uses and areas, including HVAC equipment, service areas, dumpster, offloading, loading docks, that kind of thing would have screening requirements. And a special permit could be used there in the case of existing vegetation, for example, to reduce the requirements or eliminate them where no detriment will result. I invite you all to take a very detailed look at section 6.4, which is brand new for performance standards. This only applies to multifamily, that's 3 or more units, or non-residential use. And it sets regulations beginning in section 6.4.4 for lighting. It also regulates noise. It regulates the manner in which sites are developed. It regulates traffic and pedestrian and bicycle access to these locations. It regulates connection to utilities, and it regulates fiscal impact, or at least asks significant questions about whether the proposal will have a positive revenue stream or a negative revenue stream. Jumping ahead to section 6.5. Which begins, and I'm working on my computer, so 6.5 adds additional requirements in the limited commercial district. These are pre-existing. I didn't change anything there. 6.6 is earth removal. Note on the way between 6.5 and 6.6 that the old section entitled Topographical Changes and Land Clearing has been deleted, and the following new section is recommended. This is an item that the committee still has to do some work on. New section 6.6 regulates earth removal. We're trying to do the same things that was done under the old topographical change bylaw. And the committee has still to do some homework on this to make sure that it fits the bill. And then lastly, after that section, we made a recommendation, having discussed it with Greg, to move the stormwater management bylaw to the general bylaws. The thinking there is that there are many performance standards under the stormwater regulations. Zoning, as you know, is prospective only, it's not retroactive. So to the extent that somebody's property does not comply and there's a drainage problem resulting, wouldn't be able to go after them under the stormwater regulations if they're in zoning. Because chapter 48, section 6, paragraph 1 says no ordinance or bylaw shall apply to a use already begun or to a structure in existence. So the general bylaw approach, which is used in many towns, including Dedham, where I'm most familiar with it, is a better way to address these problems in existing places. Section 7 deals with special regulations. Much of this is unchanged. Wireless, just a few minor changes were made. Jumping to the helicopter landing and storage, no changes were made. Junk cars, similar recommendation to stormwater. This is usually covered in a city or town by regulation through the general bylaws. If somebody has a junk car on their property today, you certainly want to get rid of it, and a general bylaw would do the trick. Marijuana, never touch regulations involving marijuana, and didn't in your case. And then at the end of this section, adult entertainment. We did make some editorial changes. Adult entertainment is a First Amendment issue. It's protected. You cannot regulate it directly. Constitutionally, you have to regulate what is known as the secondary effects. So the purpose paragraph basically says, because of adult entertainment's impacts on crimes to property, crimes to person, we can regulate it as to time, place, and manner. But you couldn't do that just by going after the speech itself. And I believe that the structure of your old bylaw did that. So we've added a few conditions that are statutory in nature. And that's a bylaw I've worked on in a number of cases. I just got a text from my client saying they want us in 5 minutes. So I've got 5 minutes to spend with you. Common driveways, we did not change. And I'm headed into section 8. There was a committee, I believe it's an ad hoc committee with the mission of reforming the accessory dwelling unit provision. That is their handiwork. I don't think that the full committee has seen that and voted on it, but when I was working with Sue on Friday to get this together, we put in the new work of the subcommittee or the ad hoc committee, and you'll now see that the old accessory dwelling unit provision is now a strikeout, and that still needs to be vetted by the full committee. Some major changes here with regard to your old residential bylaws. PRD, Planned Residential Development. It was the consensus of the committee that this be deleted. It had a 50-acre threshold, and it also had a number of other requirements that were very onerous, and nobody was using it. Similarly, the old residential conservation cluster provision had some legal defects. It required any subdivision over a certain size to get a special permit. We made that a voluntary provision because there's been a case from Westwood in which placing subdivisions on special permits was deemed to be illegal. So you will see in the new RCC provision, which is 8.2, there's a hybrid there between a model that I used called flexible development and your old RCC. For example, the purposes of section 8.2 are the same as your old RCC. It still has the design standards in terms of how to put this together. But we've gone to a zero lot line approach that makes it more appealing, I would think, to developers. There's some benefits for the developer in this model. Lots don't have to have frontage or area. It can be the whole thing can be a condominium if that's what the developer chooses to do. The developer can shorten up the road by making the lots bigger if he is intent upon lotting it. It's worked well in a number of different communities. My model here has always been Groton, where they're in now their third generation of this bylaw. And I don't think they've had anything but an RCC since the early 90s. I don't think that any subdivision has been approved in Groton that wasn't alternative in nature, cluster, if you will, in nature. There's a density bonus here that a developer can get by doing the right thing, that is adding more open space or preserving land or offering amenities to the community. And there's an affordable component. On that note, I would add that your inclusionary bylaw, which I'm sure was hard work on the part of somebody in the past, also contained the same defect as the RCC. It put a subdivision on a special permit, and that's been deemed illegal in a case called Wall Street Development versus Planning Board of Westwood. Otherwise, the cluster provisions here are pretty straightforward. There's open space requirements, and the roadways and buffer areas and stormwater management are all pretty consistent with your subdivision regulations. We added a new provision called senior housing. Senior housing is anything from an independent living facility to an assisted living facility to a long-term care facility to a congregate care facility. The attractive thing about these kinds of facilities is that for every tax dollar they contribute, you're probably going to be free spending about 70 cents on the dollar, and their costs will run you about 30 cents on the dollar. I take those numbers from a recent attempt that Wenham made to convert the Penguin Hall into a senior housing facility. We engaged Judy Barrett, a well-known financial analyst, to do that cost analysis, and those were her results. And I'm actually understating her results. It was a few more pennies on the dollar for the town. So it's a good thing for the town to offer. There's 85 million baby boomers, and we all got to go somewhere. So I'll skip through the requirements for senior housing, and lastly, head you into section 9. Section 9 is your existing overlay districts. Not much of this changed at all. And that section remains intact, but they're now all grouped together. So floodplain is merged now with your groundwater protection district, and anything else that's ultimately adopted later can also be added in here. Jumping ahead to section 10, you had 2 energy related regulations already. So those energy related regulations on large scale ground mounted solar and wind energy now occupy what is chapter 10. And then chapter 11, and nothing has been changed with regard to these bylaws. Chapter 11 is everybody's job description. That includes first the building inspector of buildings and the section that's devoted to his work. The major change here is that we made a recommendation for non-criminal disposition. Right now, if somebody is violating the zoning under 11.1.2, you can get a fine of $300 for each offense. But to get that fine, you have to go to a district court jury of 6, and that's a legal bill right there. Non-criminal disposition is something that can be issued like a traffic ticket. The numbers are placeholders, but it says 25 for the first offense, 50 for a second, 100 for a third, 200 for the fourth. Those numbers can change. The idea is that the town itself can issue the fine rather than a district court judge. Under the Zoning Board of Appeals, the powers have simply been restated to consistency with statute, and we added a section for the Planning Board because they're equally as important as the Board of Appeals. Under the section on special permits, the language has been rewritten, especially 11.2, which is the criteria, 11.5.2. And those criteria are the criteria that I use whenever I do a recodification. I did Legacy Place and Dedham using these criteria. It worked like a charm. Everybody knows their job and responsibilities. The developer has to hire somebody to talk about all that stuff. The neighbors get to pick their best argument if they want to fight it, and the board members have to consider each of those things in making their decision. One major change having to do with procedures was site plan review, and that's section 11.5.6. So site plan review, I'm sorry, it's 11.6. Site plan review was mischaracterized in your existing bylaw as site plan special permit. That's not what it's properly called. Special permit is yes with conditions, or no. And site plan review is always yes or yes with conditions. So think of it as a junior special permit, but it's not a special permit at all. Site plan review is unmentioned in the statute. It's the creature of the court and local bylaws. So we've simplified it to basically correspond with appropriate case law, and haven't changed much in terms of the standards that will be used by the site plan review authority, here the planning board. But the legal, you were not entirely consistent with legal requirements, and we've made that the case. Also added a few provisions at the back end, including one for lapse, one for appeals, most importantly, and one for fees and regulations. Decision of the planning board under site plan review, absent an appeal provision like 11.6.13, is to the Board of Appeals after the building permit is issued or denied. And that's not reasonable, in my opinion. The Board of Appeals decisions go straight to court. Planning board decisions should go straight to court. So for about 15 years, I've been adding this appeal mechanism to a court of competent jurisdiction. It's been reviewed in a number of places, including Westwood and Holyoke, and the courts have said it's fine to go directly to court. I think that's a much better result for everybody. It avoids delay. It makes the board responsible that decided the issue, and the Board of Appeals, which didn't have anything to do with it originally, stays out of the woodwork. A couple of other provisions have been added here with regard to recent trends. The first is a requirement that if somebody is seeking protection under the federal disability statutes and they want a reasonable accommodation, they would go to the Board of Appeals and they would initiate the process there. I don't know if you followed Wenham's travails maybe 4 or 5 years ago with Cross Keys. I was the board's lawyer. We ended up in federal district court because of some mistakes that were made in terms of processing the application. I just represented the other side in a Wilmington case where a detox center was the subject, and that town made some mistakes and we ended up in federal district court again. So better to be here, better to be safe here than sorry. And this outlines the procedures you would use. And then lastly, under 11.8, this is a provision that covers site plan review for Dover Amendment uses. Dover Amendment uses are religious uses, nonprofit educational, and childcare facilities. And it is now possible to have site plan review for these uses, whereas 10 or 15 years ago, the case law was pretty clear that you could not. The difference now is that if you stick to a simple process for site plan review, then the courts will let you do it, whereas 15 years ago it was off limits. And then lastly, section 12 is definitions, and they're all as a glossary set forth at the back. And anything that is yellow is new, and anything that is existing or struck out is what you had in your bylaw today. I'm in the process of putting together a clean version of this with a table of contents that will be used at the various workshops that are coming up. This is draft number 4. When those workshops give me enough ammunition to prepare a new draft, we'll go to draft 5. I'm around till the end. I think my contract says 3 drafts, but let's just say that in Haverhill, I'm right now on draft 16. That's coming up for a vote finally at the City Council on November 11th. So I'm very pleased to see that happen. It's been years. I don't have time for a lot of questions because, as I said, I have to dive over to Dartmouth, but I hope that that has been a review, hopefully for you, that gets you familiar with where we're going. And of course, I'm available to answer any questions if you'll simply direct them to me through Sue.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the run through. I will say that we are going to get a run through, I believe, of the ADU part after. I know you've got to go to your other client, but we're also going to get a run through specifically on the ADU. I believe
Yes.
that's correct, right, Ron?
That sort of happened outside the scope of the committee's work. Another committee was appointed. I didn't know anything about it, but now that we put their handiwork in there, let's just leave it at that.
Yeah. As far as going through high-level questions about the zoning bylaw, I'm not sure that we actually really have a reasonable period of time to do that. Rather, what I would like to do for just a couple of minutes is discuss process. And in this particular case, there's the process of taking this before annual town meeting, and how we're actually going to manage that process as far as between the different boards is concerned and between as far as the residents are concerned. So this is a lot of work. So my first observation going through all this material was, if I came from the existing zoning bylaw and tried to step to this one, to the updated zoning bylaw, I would find that challenging. So as a resident trying to compare essentially apples to apples or oranges to oranges and make a decision about whether or not they thought they supported this, I think that's going to be challenging. I think that's going to be one of the bigger challenges we have to face. And I wonder if there's been any thought about how to, I know the public forums will cover some of that, but have there been any thought given to producing documents to help people find that mapping?
Well, that's what the coded version is supposed to do. It gives you a complete roadmap of what was preserved, what was eliminated. And in the case of something moving over from zoning to a general bylaw, exactly what provisions are going to go through that. I can tell you right now that doing a track change version of the existing bylaw will not work. It's
No.
too much. It's too much movement.
No,
You'll get-
I understand.
You'll get whole sections blacked out and then it'll pop up somewhere else. So that's, I mean, I think that certainly the members of the committee have followed, we've done this is the 4th version of the coded version. And for those people that are curious enough to want to know each and every detail, I think it provides, you know, a roadmap as to what's changed.
Comments or questions from other board members?
Eli, if I may,
Yeah, go ahead, Becky.
I just looking this over, I think that the planning board, Sue and Mr. Bobrowski have done a phenomenal job. But I'm somewhat familiar with those bylaws, and I think that they, from my perspective, seem much clearer. I would agree with you, though, that the issue will be how people are able to understand it. And to that end, who typically would present this in the town meeting? And is it possible to have someone like Mr. Bobrowski available for that presentation?
Well, thank you for asking. I view it as my responsibility to do that, and I will be there for that purpose. I don't, you know, as I said to Ron and Sue, this is really the first time, unfortunately, it's speeded up tonight because I have to depart. But this is the first time you'll see the usual format that I take. The next meeting will be a workshop meeting. The next meeting will be the planning board public hearing. The next meeting will be the town meeting. So by the time I do this 4 times, you'll want to just go home. So, but I welcome questions section by section. Usually we didn't have time for that tonight. I'll stop and ask if anybody has a question about what I just said on section 1, then stop again at section 2 and handle all questions from all comers. And, you know, typically that takes an hour and a half or a couple of hours. And hopefully people get familiar with it, which begins the vesting process. But more importantly, if they have something that we deem to be an improvement, that always helps the process, because now somebody's, you know, made a contribution that's going to be reflected in the final draft. And I'm always open to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other board members with questions on process? Ron, I was anticipating that we were going to have a separate discussion on the ADU tonight. Is that correct still?
I hadn't planned on it, but I think Gary's online to explain what the citizens have come up with. The planning board had put that word in as a bookmark right now as to what they submitted. So if you want to go into the weeds on that, we can, or I can have, maybe if Gary's on board, can give an overview.
I don't want the weeds. I want the overview.
With that, I'm going to Dartmouth. So I appreciate the time, Mr. Chairman, and I'll sure we'll be doing this again in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Bobrowski.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.
Mark.
So is Gary available to do an overview?
I'm
And
here.
so,
Can you hear me, Eli?
Yep.
I would have liked to have discussed this with a draft in your hands. I guess you have a draft by virtue of what Mr. Bobrowski distributed.
Yep.
This bylaw section revision was the result of about half a year's work of an ad hoc committee of about eight people or so. And it was brought before the planning board to vote on, and the majority voted to adopt this language as a framework for discussion, just like everything Mr. Bobrowski submitted. The purpose of the accessory dwelling unit law has always been to provide some extra types of housing in town without really changing the look and feel of the town, because the majority of these are always within the existing structures. The goal is to provide older homeowners with means of obtaining rental income, perhaps moving into the accessory apartment and renting out the rest of the building. Allows them to remain in town. It will allow existing non-conforming accessory apartments to comply with zoning and building codes, to allow them to get inspected. And the law basically says that these will be permitted as long as they're kept relatively small in size, as long as the building is owner occupied, one of the units is owner occupied, and they cannot be held in separate ownership. Now, there's a bit more to it than that, but I just want to say at the get-go that a lot of towns have had accessory dwelling unit laws in place, but have found very few units ever being produced. Our town's had a law in place for quite a while, and I think has only seen 1 or 2 units being created. So what a lot of towns have done, many around us, Ipswich, Salem, Gloucester, they're all working on revising and liberalizing their laws to encourage these, because they're inherently going to be fairly inexpensive because they're not going to be very big. Some of the other provisions of this is if you rent them out, they have to be rented for at least 6 months at a time. The idea is to provide housing, not temporary rentals. And that you must supply 1 additional parking space for the unit. And if your building already doesn't comply with existing law, like you're supposed to have 2 parking spaces for a single family dwelling, you'd have to create 2 for your dwelling and 1 for this. And lastly, if you were to put one in a detached structure, that structure will have had to have already existed at least a year prior to this law going into effect. We'd like to start out without encouraging people to do new construction for this. So that's the overview.
Okay, so you do or you don't encourage doing a new construction as attachments to existing buildings?
Not at this time. I think that I think it's wise for us to get this in place and live with it for a little while. We don't anticipate the town seeing more than 10 or 15 at most built in the following year after it's passed. That's been the history.
So this is only really just modification of existing structures to partition off or allow the existence of the ADU.
Yes.
And then is there, and I know that the planning board is just engaged in the discussion process for this right now. Is it envisioned that at some point that the ADU law would be updated or modified to encompass new construction or construction of those detached structures? Is that what's the progression and progress that you think the ADU proposal would undergo over the next several years?
Bring those comments to the public forum and let's air them publicly and see how people feel right now. But our group felt that we should be cautious but reasonable, because we do want to see some created. We think this is a slam dunk kind of way of getting some extra units in town. Adding what you're saying, I think, is the kind of thing the town might want to consider maybe after a year or 2 that this is in place.
Okay. Questions from other board members?
Eli, if I may, I do have two. One is, what is there an exact definition of elderly? Gary?
I don't believe we use that word in the bylaw section.
Okay, I'm pretty sure I read that to enable elderly residents to stay in place.
Well, we refer to older homeowners. I mean, that's the generally speaking, one of the goals of it is to allow older homeowners to remain.
Right. I understand that, but I just think that is a term that
Oh, I see it. Yeah.
you see what I'm saying?
Section 2, in 4.6.12, we mention young families, local employees, and the elderly who may have difficulty finding housing options. That's our target audience, loosely speaking.
Right, but I just think that that's something that might need to have a specific definition. Because I think the older we get, the older elderly seems. And my other question is, does this apply to specific zones or districts, or does it apply to any?
It applies to all zoning districts.
Okay, thank you.
Although certainly, the general district in certain parts of town will have a tough time getting the extra parking in, so they probably won't be able to take advantage of this very much.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll need to wrap up this section on the agenda pretty quick. We're getting a little bit behind. Any other high-level questions from board members? All right, so I think I'm going to encourage board members to go to the remaining public forums. I think going into annual town meeting, we're definitely going to have some input on how we will help make town meeting be successful and manageable. Oh, a reminder, we have, since we have most of the planning board here, we have the first presentation by the developer on the 40B coming up on the 29th, Thursday the 29th. So I imagine that many of you will want to be there to hear that, see that. This is the zoning bylaw updates, the ADU proposal. Obviously a tremendous amount of work, long needed work, and we strongly support the continued progress and discussion on this. So I'm gonna thank the planning board for their time here tonight, and their time over the past year or so working on these updates. Any other comments from any of the other board members? All right, and I think we're going to try and move on to agenda item number 5 here. This is COVID updates for local business support. Greg, do you want to give us a brief status update on where we are right now?
Well, first, just generally on COVID, again, we continue to beat the odds in terms of doing well with our numbers. We did have an uptick of confirmed cases, though they were actually older cases. People got tested after they had it, just because they thought, gee, after the fact, maybe that was COVID. So we did have an uptick in our numbers, but no current cases. So we continue, as I say, to do well as a community. Obviously, there's a lot of angst around as we look around not only Massachusetts, but the whole country, and indeed other parts of the world where it seems to be on a resurgence. So that obviously is cause for concern. And so we will continue to monitor carefully. The schools have moved forward with the hybrid model for the younger students. So that's in progress. And so we'll are thankful for that, and hopefully that can keep going. So the efforts, as we talked a little bit about last time, how we can be supporting our businesses, particularly as we enter the very critical holiday season, an important time for small business owners for sure. And we have been in discussions both with the chamber and with business owners, as well as Erica Brown over at the Cricket, on ways we might collaborate. Those discussions are ongoing, and a number of good ideas are starting to percolate. And so I hope we can bring some of those to fruition in the next couple of weeks as we move into November here. Maybe some ideas include some cooperative advertising, some ways to utilize the web a little bit more creatively and jointly. Also just more distribution and a reprinting of the guide that was developed in August as part of revised Festival by the Sea, and getting that out. So those are all in progress, and good discussions continue. Welcome people's comments or ideas tonight as well, as we continue to work with the businesses in town. I think one of the big questions that many, at least some of the business owners have in town, is how long the tents for the outdoor dining will stay up. I know that that's a concern for some. And so, as you know, originally they were permitted temporarily through the end of October, and then the governor did extend that, giving the option of extending them through the end of November. So instead of a November 1st deadline, a December 1st deadline. I think I have a few concerns about, if we get early snows, what that might do, how we cope with that in terms of plowing streets and the sidewalks, if there are the tents there. I also have just a general concern about how much those tents are going to be used as the weather gets colder. I know that the one, they weren't proposing any heat, and in Calais they were proposing to have some heat, even though they were having just two sides, but they have not been able to secure the heaters. Heaters are hard to come by, as everyone across the country is trying to create some temporary heated space. So I think we need to evaluate the effectiveness of the two tents to see if they're going to be used later or not, and again balancing one set of business group versus another.
Okay. So I'm going to go around board members asking for comments. I'm going to take some public comments as well on this. I know that there's some comments in the chat. I do see some comments on speed limits coming up in the chat. We're going to be covering that shortly after we get through this piece of the agenda. So I know that when we discussed the tents, the governor had already made his change to make December 1st the new date for outside dining. And Calais at least had put those tents up expecting to be able to proceed somewhere into November. I think that was part of the original discussion. Without the heaters, they may very well not be that interested in going that deep into December, but I haven't had a chance to personally talk to them about that. I think it's probably reasonable to assume that people won't, without heaters, won't be using those tents outside very deep into November. Might be reasonable for us to consider setting date in the middle of November sometime for either taking those down, or if businesses find they're not using them and take those tents down voluntarily, at that point, that might be a time when we simply agree to take down the parking spaces in use as well. So I'm going to go through board members and ask for comments, thoughts. Actually, I'll ask anybody on the board who wants to speak up. Go ahead. Speak.
Yeah, I'll comment, Eli. Is this just at this point speculation with regard to what the various restaurateurs want to do with the tents? In other words, we haven't had input from them in the past several days about, well, what do you think? And maybe I would ask that of Greg. Have you heard from any of them?
Let's see. I think Cal has indicated, if their preference would be to go to Thanksgiving. They'd like to get through the Thanksgiving weekend. That would be their preference. They don't see them going into December, but they did have that preference. And I don't know if the mooring, I'm forgetting what that detail was. I know that we had reached out to them, but I don't recall what the response was from the mooring. I know that Sonia spoke to them, but I'm forgetting what the response was. She might be able to give her a response in the chat or log in here. And then of course the other two don't have tents, and they plan to stop having the outdoor dining pretty soon, in the next week or so, I think. Certainly not going past mid-November. They're ready to stop doing their outdoor dining on the street.
Is this something that you
would? Go ahead.
Yeah, is this something that you would track, merchant by merchant? And if somebody just says, I'm done October 31st, because it needs the cooperation to remove those large cement barriers.
Right. Right. So we would definitely get something definitive from them.
Okay. As Eli suggested, I'm in favor of November 15th, pending what these folks say. When's our next meeting? Like November 1st or something? November 2nd. November 2nd,
yes.
Yeah. I understand that Thanksgiving weekend, but if they haven't got heaters, that at this point I think is kind of wishful thinking. And I would certainly say kind of a hard stop at November 15th unless something else changes. And maybe earlier for some, if they come to you and they say, yeah, I'm done, can you remove the barriers?
Right.
Eli, may I jump in if John's done?
I'm done.
I think that I just want to say that it's hard to know what the downturn for retailers is. However, I do think that we have given a nice leg up to the restaurants by following along with doing the tents and cordoning off parking areas. However, it is colder, they're not heated, and it's not unusual for us to have, or out of the realm of possibility, to have snow on Thanksgiving. I think it would not be unreasonable to have the tents removed and the parking available again by the end of October. And it's just this way, we're kind of trying to do what we can for the retail businesses now. Especially since restaurants are allowed to have some indoor dining. And that's my 2 cents.
Jeff,
I'm pretty much looking at usage. And when I've driven through the village and looked at the usage of those tent areas, it's really down with the cold.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that the idea of going to November 15th seems like a stretch to me. Thanksgiving's out of the question because that's right through the end of the month. The Thanksgiving weekend ends on November 29th, I believe. And so I think that's out of the question. Since neither of the two tent facilities were able to work out any heating plan that would really accommodate the use of those dining areas when the temperatures are now dropping into the low 50s, high 40s at night. And through no fault of their own, I know the college really tried to push that. That to extend it with minimal use seems like an impingement on the use of that parking that we've reserved for this outdoor dining use up until now. So my own thought would be to go through not the 15th of November, but the 8th of November, which is a little bit of an extension into November, but you know, in case there are some warm days. But I agree with Greg, it's going to be chaos if we have snow. And when I see the usage that's going on in those dining areas at this time, it's really way, way down from when they were first installed in the summertime. So my thought about this would be to make a vote tonight on November 8th.
Ann?
I agree with Jeff. At this point, the damage to the retail is eclipsing the benefits for the restaurants. If they've only got 1 or 2 hearty people a week, it's just not worth it. So I agree with November 8th.
I'm gonna, for the sake of people who are just listening, I'm going to, there are a number of people. I know Mari is advocating for October 31st. Jim Brown says he has retailers who are being negatively impacted. I know that the mooring would like to go through with outdoor dining in one form or another until December 1st. Don't know how realistic that is. There are some days when there is still some warm weather, daytimes and weekends. Terry Kalman pointed out that we'll still allow some unheated dining. So there's a mix of thoughts out there. Anybody in the public who wants to make any comment, please, you can go ahead and unmute yourself now. Ask to be recognized. I'll recognize you and let you make a comment.
This is Amy from Mari's.
Sure, go ahead.
I appreciate you meeting about this. I'm going to try not to get upset. Sorry. The holiday business for us is like everything, and it starts just after Halloween. To have those parking spaces back would be, I can't tell you what it would mean to us, or to me at least. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. It's hard. Yeah, I hear you, and it's hard for us to have perfect crystal balls, obviously, to see what the effect of one change for another versus another may have. Other members of the public?
This is Jim Brown, and the only reason I want to weigh in is because I speak with Amy quite a bit, and I know how challenging and difficult this is for her, and so I just kind of want to make sure her message gets put across. I also am the landlord for Collars and for Alley's Beach Street Cafe, so this is kind of a fine line that I am walking on. But I think that the board has been very, very fair to the restaurants. I think they've done better than the retailers have through this COVID. That not only were they able to open up sooner than the retail businesses, but they were able to add seating. And in some cases, I think with the outdoor seating and with the indoor opening up, we're doing as well as they've been in the past. So I think Amy is just looking at the lost spaces from a visibility standpoint. Especially College 10, it's pretty big, and it's challenging to park on either side of that 10, or at least on the upstreet side of it. So I'm sure that's basically what she would have liked to have said. And I appreciate you guys. This is not an easy thing, I know, and you addressed this at a few meetings. So I appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not an easy solution space, right? I mean, there's no way for us to say, oh yes, if we make this change, it's going to dramatically change the situation one way or another. So yeah, it is a little bit difficult to figure out what's going to be the ideal solution. So Jeff, you had proposed a November 8th date at which we would, what is your thinking? Is this when we tell the restaurants that they need to take down their tents at that point, and the parking goes away as well?
Yes.
Eli, may I speak once more before a motion gets made?
Yes, you may.
I would like to reiterate that I think October 31st would be fair as opposed to November 8th. And my reasoning for that is we have facilitated for the restaurants, and just the fact that I work in retail, and I've already seen a lot of people doing their holiday shopping. And I think it's going to come perhaps a little earlier. just based on what I've seen personally through my work. And I think if we can help our retailers, as we have our restaurants, I don't think ending the end of October, as had been initially stated by the governor, is an unreasonable thing to do. And especially with seeing how little the outdoor spaces are being used at this point. Thank you.
So my issue with, thank you. My issue with that position is we signaled in previous meetings and discussions that with the governor extending the deadline to December 1st and restaurants wanting to try to push into November, we signaled a willingness to support them to some extent into November, both by working with them towards enclosed tents and to supporting research and the possibility of heating tents. And CALA's did communicate to us, and we discussed it in previous meetings, an interest in proceeding further into November, all the way into Thanksgiving weekend. That's been mentioned a couple times in previous meetings. And we did not signal to them otherwise. So I don't think it's particularly fair to say, no, October 31st is it. That's my view. I'm sympathetic to the retailers, but I think that we did have discussions and took a position that suggested fairly strongly that we're going to support restaurants into November.
Eli, I understand that. A restaurant has essentially a year round to make their money. A retailer, a huge portion of their yearly take is made in this quarter. And even a week can make a huge difference to them, especially at this point in time when it's been such a challenge. CALA's had talked about possibly doing a heater, but they haven't been able to find one. I again think that we have really done what we can to help the restaurants. You know, the fact is we live in New England. It does snow and it gets icy. And we won't be able to address the roads properly if in fact that we have weather issues coming up. But my biggest concern here is that retailers already have maybe 7 weeks starting in the beginning of November, and that this has been such a tough year for them. Even a week to them can mean a huge thing. Restaurants are still allowed to have people inside, and retailers were late to the game because of the restrictions. I just think that it's time for us to help focus the help on retailers for their 7 weeks at most of income, real income earning. Thank you.
Comments from other board members?
Yeah, I might ask or add one more thing, Eli, if I can. And Greg, is there anyone in any of these restaurants that have said, yeah, we're thinking of folding up early, or you just don't have any input from any of these guys?
So the two without the tents are pretty much going to pack it up very soon.
All right.
Both, as I said, Callis has expressed a desire to try to go through Thanksgiving, and Mooring said through the end of November.
I mean, I would advocate for still on November 8th, and I understand Eli's point that these restaurants at this point are expecting they were going to go at least sometime into November, but check with them on a weekly basis, and anybody who wants to pack it up early, we're happy to take away the cement barriers and return the sidewalk and the street to its original use. You know, so much is weather dependent. You don't know. I mean, we're sitting here and what is it, like 55, 60 degrees every day. And we don't know what's going to happen in 2 weeks. I mean, the trend is down, no question. But I think those folks are probably hoping maybe we'll get a couple of more 65, 70 degree days. But
All right. We've
One more small thought, which is that
Lorena Iavani, I make a suggestion. I'd like to be recognized.
hold on, Lorraine. Just a minute. I'm going to recognize you in a minute. Ann Harrison was in the middle of talking. I'll let her speak first, and then I'll recognize you.
Okay, thank you.
Ann, go ahead.
the end of daylight savings time is November 1st. That means that instead of being dark at 6, it will be dark at 5 and cold. I think I still favor the November 8th date, but I think by then it will be obvious to everybody that it's too cold. And I think we should just say that. That's when it stops.
Lorraine?
Okay, I think November 8th is a good goal. And the reason is you're giving 3 weeks notice. And then the other driver here is safety. And none of us, as you said, know what the weather is going to bring. So if you get a little black ice or whatever, you know, let's face it, you don't want to have an accident or anybody injured. So really and truly, it's the safety issue that's going to drive this. And I think that's a good compromise. You mentioned November, and you're right, Eli, you did give a commitment. So November 8th seems like a reasonable advance notice, and they may pack it up earlier than that. And at the same time, you're giving consideration as the board to safety. I mean, let's face it, we've got to get roads cleared. We have to make sure, you know, if we have black ice, we don't put anyone in jeopardy. So those are my comments. I've been listening very carefully. This is, you know, it's a difficult issue. But I think, you know, a good compromise is the November 8th. So I'm going to go recommend that. But who am I? Just listening in here. So thank you. I'm off now. Thank you.
Okay. Jeff, you want to put something in the form of a motion?
Well, I just wanted to add as a comment in discussion first that whatever date we choose, that the tents and barriers are not going to disappear the next day. It's going to take some time to get a crew in there to remove the tents, and it's going to take time in DPW's schedule to remove the barriers. So I'm listening to this discussion going back and forth, and you know, I think that Lorraine's points are good ones. I don't recall ever making a commitment to CALAs as a board that we would go through at least until mid-November. I know that we've been discussing that, but when I look at the utilization, and that's the thing that's driving my saying, let's move the date to the 8th, that the utilization is so far down that it doesn't really justify the use of the space. So in terms of a motion, I think any motion needs to have a takedown date. And I don't know if that can be accomplished in a day. I think it can definitely be accomplished in 2 days. That may influence in terms of going all the way through to November 8th. I'm not sure. I'd like to just, given those comments, I'd like to just hear another comment or two from board members, Eli, before we go to a motion.
Well, actually, if we do a motion, then, I mean, you can have discussion on the motion afterwards, right? A lot of the discussion that we just had really could have been in the form of motion, but you know what?
Sure.
We've been already down this route. I can let it continue this way for a little bit so that we have a clean motion at the end. So as far as the date is concerned, the simplest way, it seems to me, is to say, instead of saying that you will allow sidewalk dining or tented dining through the 8th, simply say the tents need to be gone by the 9th, and then however the restaurants manage that is up to them. If they can have their people come in on the 9th, take the tent away and it's done, great. If they can't, then they have to do it a little bit earlier. That would be the simplest way, it seems to me. And then as far as the cement barriers are concerned, the DPW works for, well, Greg. And I think it's not a tremendous amount of work to move those barriers. I imagine they can move them out of there pretty darn quick if we asked them to. Greg, is that fair to say?
Yes, yeah, no, we can get those out of the way, assuming there's no other weather issues going on.
Okay, so I'd like to make the motion then that outdoor dining will end on no later than November 8th, and that any structures, tents, tables, chairs need to be removed from the sidewalks and public areas by November 9th.
We say noon on November 9th?
By November 9th.
By November 9th.
Yes. Well, let's say, you want a time? 5 o'clock.
It's the whole day. But, because the original language on by November, so so there's your actually let's do it officially. That was the original motion was by November 9th. Do I have a second for that motion?
Yes.
All right, discussion. So on the discussion, when you originally said by November 9th, I thought, well, that means the tents have to be gone by the end of the November 8th. When I proposed noon on November 9th, the thinking that I had was, well, 9th is a business day. Having tents removed on Sunday may not be necessarily easy to do. Maybe those businesses won't be operating on the 9th, on the 8th, or maybe they won't be doing the pickup of tents on the 8th. I don't know. But if we by noon on November 9th, it would give them an opportunity 3 weeks ahead of time to schedule those people for a business day for removing of the tents. That was my thinking. I don't know if that's, well, anyway, that was my thinking. Other board members' comments?
Is noon realistic, do you think, or do you need?
I would have hoped so.
Jeff had said 5, certainly by 5, but.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
So in that case, the friendly amendment would be tents and paraphernalia to be removed by 5 p.m. on November 9th. You okay with that friendly amendment, Jeff? He's muted, but.
Yeah, I think that's the way I phrased it, but that's fine. If you want to amend it that way, just for clarity, that's fine.
Sure.
Did you want to kind of add something that if restaurants want to do it earlier, that's fine, or something to that effect?
I said no later then.
Yeah. But Greg, I think we have to be active, and if there are people that want to remove it, say a week earlier or 2 weeks earlier.
Yes, no, we'll make sure to pick up the barrier just as soon as the tables are gone.
Okay.
All right. So motion and discussion made. No more discussion. Roll call vote. Mr. Round.
Yes.
Mr. Harrison. No, God, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Yes.
Ms. Jakes.
Yes.
Mr. Bob Turner.
Yes.
Ms. Bowling votes yes.
Ms. Bowling.
Say
Quid pro quo.
Fair play.
All right. Okay. I think that's going to take it for local business support. We are pretty far behind. Let's move on to traffic measures. Do we have Todd here? Yes, we do. Good. All right, so we're going to be going over a few things on traffic measures tonight. There's been previous discussions on safety speed zones and proposed speed limits changes due to the state coming back and telling us we needed to adjust our speed limits after our reset of them a little while ago. So we have some proposals for new safety zones which meet the requirements of the state as they clarified them to us after our last round. We're going to go over those. We're going to hopefully approve those tonight and approve the proposed speed limit changes that Chief Fitzgerald and crew have worked on over the past several months. In addition, we're going to be discussing 2 stop signs on Forest Street to potentially mitigate some of the speeding problems over there. Very briefly, we will introduce a couple of options for Mill Street that we are going to be discussing on November 2nd. And I put those in here and I phrased it this way because I knew this meeting was going to run long. And I didn't want to set up an expectation that we were going to discuss these options heavily. We're just going to lay them out a little bit and then give people a heads up on what we're going to be discussing on the 2nd. That one will have a full-blown discussion on the options for Mill Street. Okay, so let's go through the safety zones first. And Todd, you can go ahead and correct me. Todd and Greg, you can go ahead and correct me on any of the details. So the proposed special regulation safety zones where we would have a speed limit of 20 miles an hour are Bella Street, Atwater Avenue, Beach Street, Bridge Street to Central Street to Beach Street, Brook Street, the length of Lincoln Street, which is right in front of the schools, Norwood Street, Ocean Street, outbound as you turn off Summer Street, inbound entering the first curve. And then I'll come back to Pine Street, Pleasant Street Extension, Rosedale Avenue, Tux Point Road. Those would all be 20 miles an hour. And then Pine Street would have a section that would run 20 miles an hour, and that would begin at the Bridge Street intersection, and it would run outbound to, not to Woodholm. Was it to Woodholm? And that I had this wrong before.
No, it is to Woodholm, Eli.
It is to Woodholm. Sorry, that was updated. And then from there, it would be 25 miles an hour to just before Route 128, and then increase to 35 miles an And then School Street would be 20 miles an hour up until Pleasant Street, then transitions to 25 miles an hour. And then it gets 35 miles an hour posted at 128. So those are the proposed safety zones. I'll take questions and comments. First of all, if there are any clarifications from Greg or Chief Fitzgerald, those go first, and then questions or comments from the board. And then I'll ask for any comments from the public.
There's nothing on my end, Eli. That's pretty much what we have on the sheet.
Yes, I'm good, Eli.
Board members.
I've looked very carefully at the various comments that townspeople have put in written comments to the board. I wanted to make a comment about Pine Street, that it's 35 miles an hour. And then I think we need to drop it again to 25 just beyond the entrance ramp to southbound 128. Because if there's no other sign, and a lot of the information about signs that's on this spreadsheet, I collected by driving around and looking, and sometimes there aren't signs. People will think that they can drive 35 miles an hour right up through the transfer station and up Tobacco Road into Hamilton, and I don't think that that's what we want to see. There's no sidewalks there, there are pedestrians there are bikes there, and I think that we should have 25 just beyond the southbound entrance to 128.
Eli?
Were you going to talk about that particular point or another point? Becky?
Oh, no, I just wanted to, I'm fairly certain that going up Pine Street, this is to Jeff's point, once you get sort of beyond Rockwood Heights Road on the right is a sign that actually says 40 miles per hour. So it increases there. So if Jeff is talking about keeping that 25, and it doesn't say that on these sheets, but I drive that to work, and it does say 40 miles per hour. And people definitely pick up speed right there.
So
if they're not already going fast.
So we have an issue. The state has jurisdiction where the interchange is. And so we don't get to set the speed limit. So they have set the speed limit, it should be 35, basically around the on and off ramps. But we can set it, as Jeff suggested, we can set it back to 25 on the other side.
Yes.
So there'd be a short stretch that's 35 because that's state jurisdiction, but our jurisdiction can keep it at 25 on either end.
If my concern is enforcement. I mean, we already have, and I don't, I mean, it's hard to be on every street all the time, but I think it's obvious to everybody that people just basically pick the speed they want to go, and that's what they do. I have many people right on the back of my car because I'm not, I'm doing the speed limits in town. And just my observation, again, people go way too quickly. If we're going to be changing speed limits, such as on Pine Street, before and after what the state regulates, what are we going to do to ensure that that the speed limits will be adhered to?
So I think we probably need to divorce the topic of enforcement from the discussion of which speed of the speed limits, unless unless we think we have some reason to believe that setting a particular speed limit in a particular area is, by virtue of that area and by virtue of the speed limit, going to produce an enforcement problem, I think we should keep the two topics separate. Because otherwise this conversation will be, we're going to be handling like two different things in parallel, and it's not going to be very productive. So if there's something about setting the speed limit at 35 miles an hour versus 40 miles an hour, which is inherently going to cause a problem up there, then that's one thing. But in terms of the overall enforcement, I'd like to keep that conversation separate for another time.
Eli, I also think it's important to underscore that this is something that's been studied for over a year now to try and bring us back into compliance with the concerns that the state of Massachusetts brought, that our definition of safety zones was overly broad. And that these graduated increases in speed on Pine and School are part of that attempt to bring us into compliance, where we could not justify having a safety zone in those areas, as well as some of the other streets that are in here, and the reversions to 25 on the 3 streets that are named.
So I have a point of information. So the 40-mile-an-hour sign that's on Pine Street, where we transition currently to 40 miles an hour, is that where the proposed 35-mile-an-hour speed would start, or where is the transition from 25 to 35 supposed to be on Pine Street?
Eli, if I may.
Yes, please.
So I think that we were going to do 25 from Woodhome all the way to 128, where it changes to 40. So where it changes to it's not 35, it's 40, is just past the furthest end of Rockwood Heights, right before the exit 16 on ramp. And then it goes from the other. It goes to the other on ramp to the southbound side, and then we were going to go back to 25 once we got up on Pipeline Road, or the upper portion of Pine Street.
Okay, and that 40-mile-an-hour sign is a state sign? That's
That's a state sign that's on that section of road that kind of links the two on and off ramps of exit 16.
Okay, fine. That's perfect. So actually, Jeffy answered your question as well, right?
Well, I don't know who saw that as a 40-mile-an-hour sign. I went and looked, and I see it as 35, but I'm getting old and my eyes may be going, and those numbers could be transposed in some way.
It's 40.
Yeah.
Going up Pine Street, going out there, yeah, it's 40. Trust me, I see it a lot.
Is that when you hit the gas?
Yeah, it is. Sorry. School Street's different. School Street's 35. In any case,
if the state, Greg, requires a minimum of 35, I think we should be at 35.
We can make that request.
Okay.
But the state's the one who set that sign.
Correct.
Yeah. The current 40-mile-an-hour sign.
Well, they did one on School Street that's different, so.
Yeah, the School Street one's different. I thought you were talking about Pine Street.
I am, but if the state's saying that they can go down to 35 on School Street, maybe we can get them to go down to 35 on Pine Street.
Okay. All right, but Chief Fitzgerald did answer your the other aspect of your question, which was posting on the other side of the intersection that it would drop back down to 25. When I say
Yeah,
intersection.
we've never discussed that before tonight.
No, we have not, but I think you just said that. Is that correct, Chief? Todd?
Yeah, that is what he said.
Yeah, yes, that is what I said. And if we talk about School Street, the 35-mile-an-hour signs that are up there now were 40. And then when the speed limits changed a year or so ago, when the safety zones were broadened, it was put back up to 35, I believe, at one of the meetings that we had with the board. But I think the upper School Street portion by the Atwater Ave is technically supposed to be 40.
The sign that's 35 is actually right before the Gloucester ramp on the right-hand side.
On the right-hand side, and that was 40 at one point.
So do we illegally change that against the will of the state?
It went down to 25, and then I believe we put it back up to 35 at one point, but it should be 40.
Okay. Well, if that's what the state wants.
All right. So no changes proposed there outside of we have to do the 40-mile-an-hour signage where the state previously had 40-mile-an-hour signage. Correct.
But putting that to 25, then after the southbound entrance exit, where there are no sidewalks, just like Jeff was saying.
That's on Pine Street?
Yes.
Yes, but I think we switched our conversation over to School Street. On School Street,
yeah,
the 35-mile-an-hour transition, is that now a 40-mile-an-hour transition to conform with the state?
We'll have to confirm. I'd like to confirm with the state on that.
Okay. So the positions are accurate. It's just the final number, 35 versus 40. All right. Any other questions or comments from board members on those safety zones?
Yeah, Eli, I have one question. I might ask Todd. Just Atwater Avenue, and that's 20 the whole way. And I know that when you get up to the curve, then there's a lot of stuff that goes on as you come around that curve. You've got the summer camp, and then you're really getting close to Beaver Dam. But the original stretch, now I ride that road a lot, but I only ride it at night, and I don't know what's going on during the day. And that's probably what, a quarter of a mile. And I'm just wondering if 20 makes sense at the start of Atwater, where it hits school.
Yeah, I think we propose, I mean, years ago, that was a dirt road, and I believe it was posted 20 up there anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it was ever changed when it was paved. So it might be 20 the entire length. That's something I'd have to check.
That's what it says.
Yeah.
And you know,
believe
I'm
it
on that
should.
road a lot, but like I say, not during the day. So I don't know if there are pedestrians. Frankly, it's a pretty deserted road until you get into come around what the little bridge over the brook, and then you absolutely 20's what you got to be. But
yeah, exactly. And I think looking at my notes here, I think it's originally posted at 20. So during our discussions, we decided just to leave it at 20 due to the fact there's a lot of people walking and running that area.
Okay. Yeah. So my only question would be that straightaway, and it's just a straight road for several hundred yards.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I just think leaving it 20 is probably the best option up there, the
Okay.
entire length.
I move that we vote to accept the safety zones as described on the.
I have a comment, Anne, before the motion gets made.
Mhm.
And this is to Todd. Tux Point Road. I do have occasion to be driving up and down that. And I don't know if you could do this, but it does seem to me that it is a very narrow road. Would 15 miles per hour make more sense on that, or is that just too unreasonable?
Well, I think we'd have to have a traffic engineering study to reduce it any lower than 20. So I think that's why we left it at 20.
Thank you very much.
And before you make your motion, I did say that I would, accept any questions or comments from the public on these. I know that Bill Cole wanted to say something, so I'm going to recognize people from the public who want to speak on these safety zones right now. Bill Cole, you want to unmute yourself? Go ahead and make comments.
Hi, thank you, Eli, for letting me speak. So this is Bill Cole, I live at 102 Pine Street. And can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm referring to the third paragraph of the article I read in the Cricket. It says, similarly, Pine Street is proposed to have a 20 mile per hour from Central to Woodholm and 25 miles an hour from Woodholm out towards 128 where it goes to 35. And my three thoughts on that sentence are, I think it makes more sense to replace the name street name Woodholm with the name Walker, AKA Pleasant Street, where all traffic must stop anyhow. The second point is, making this W name replacement in the proposed changes that are up for approval right now removes that acceleration for this very short couple 100-yard section of Pine Street. And by the way, this is the only section of the heater that's getting this increase. So from a safety zone perspective, that is a heavily walked section. And then third, by using that natural demarcation of the Walker Road stop sign for the change point in the speed limit, it also supports, I think, the state's efforts to remove, shall I say, the road rally feel of speed limit signs that used to be a lot greater throughout this tiny six square mile part of Massachusetts. And, our town is not that big, so it's easy for us to think about all this speeding up on that water and all this kind of stuff, but it's like, make it simple, and I think having that point after Woodholm and that people are going to try to accelerate and then come to a break, or vice versa, come off the stop sign and then accelerate, but then they got to slow down again at Woodholm. It makes it harder, I think, for any enforcement that would need to occur, especially when the courts don't, throw out cases if they're not over 10 or 20 miles faster than the speed limit. So I think it's important to keep it simple for this section of the heavily utilized heater area. Hopefully that. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, well, thanks for your comments. I will clarify one thing. The things that I cited as the safety zones, those are the ones where speed limits typically are going to stay 20 miles an hour. There are a few streets that we were finding that we were going to need to revert to 25 miles an hour because they really didn't meet the definitions of safety zones. And one of those is Pleasant Street, which was going to revert to 25, Walker Road, and Raymond Street, all of which were reverting to 25 miles an hour. Across the full length. So that is another section of the heater that wouldn't be 25, that would not be 20 miles an hour. Todd, did you have any comment on Mr. Cole's proposal about Walker versus Woodholm?
No, I just think that when we took a look at the safety zone on Pine Street, it was a quarter mile either side of Newport Park. So that's why we kind of decided on the area of Woodhome. But, you know, he makes a valid point that maybe we should rethink and put it up to 20 all the way to the end of Pine Street at Pleasant.
Prefaced on the notion that you're going to be coming into a stop sign anyway.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
And I believe we talked about that as well during our discussions.
All right. And by the way, the Bike and Pedestrian Committee supports the zones as presented by the chief. That's here in the chats.
I would like to comment when I have a chance, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, please, Al, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Al Sentner, I'm the chair of the Bike and Ped Committee. We did, referring back to Mr. Cole's comments, we did actually study that. And our original proposal was to have the safety zone start at Pleasant at 20 miles an hour all the way in on Pine. But when the state kind of mandated that we take a closer look at that, that was kind of the compromise to, you know, with the state's demand that we relook at those zones. So that's why we moved it to Woodhome from there. Otherwise, this is something that's been in the works for over 3 years. And as a committee, we would support what the police department has come up with. And then going back a little bit further, we did think of the traffic remediation portion of this, which is always the most difficult thing for any town. So that does need to be a whole separate discussion. So with that, we support this. We hope that that it helps, and that is the end of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Any other comments from board members or thoughts on Mr. Cole's comments before we take a motion? Oh, and before I finalize whether or not there anybody else wants to talk.
The concern that was raised when we discussed the Pine Street, Woodhome versus Walker Road was that stretching it all the way out to Walker Road is a half a mile from the elder housing, and that seemed to be a stretch in terms of a safety zone for in the state's definitions of what they were talking about for safety zones. So that's definitely why Woodhome was chosen as the place to break. The idea that somebody going up 5 miles an hour is not going to be able to stop at the stop sign at Pleasant Street. I mean, then maybe they can't stop coming inbound on School Street at 25 miles an hour at the stop sign. I mean, we can stop at stop signs when we want to, although lots of people don't.
I don't think his point was that people couldn't stop, but I do support Mr. Cole's comment that why for a couple hundred yards do you have people increase speed to a stop sign? I think it makes sense to have School and Pine the same speed limit up to the stop sign. I understand they're slightly different spaces and what's going on the roads, but it does keep continuity. And I think thereby simplifying if you have it 20 up to the stop sign at Pleasant.
Hey, Greg, ultimately, you're going to be the one who ends up having to have conversations and letters and communications back and forth with the state if they have any questions about that. What do you think?
I think there'll be some pushback from the state about going all the way up to Pleasant Walker on Pine. I think they will question the justification for that length of a safety zone, just like they question the overall safety zone.
Yeah.
That would be consistent with their position.
Understandable. Yep.
All right. Any other members of the public have any comments?
Yeah, this is Dana Vermillier on 157 School Street. Could I make a comment, question?
You may.
No, it's been a long evening. Because School Street coming off of 128 is very heavily trafficked, and the trucks go barreling down it and bikes also go on it, and it is near the school. I think for safety purposes, the 20 mph speed monitoring sign at Hidden Drive currently is very valuable. And I would think it would be great if they could leave that and not increase it to 25 there.
Chief Fitzgerald, do you want to talk to that? And Joan, I just realized I see your hand raised. I apologize. I will call on you next. I am still getting used to Zoom.
I think we took a look at that, and that section of School Street does not meet the criteria of a safety zone, indicating that we should probably leave it at 25 miles an hour.
Could you just elaborate a little bit more on why it doesn't, in terms of?
Well, a safety, I mean, a thickly settled district is defined as a house every 200 feet, and which would indicate a 25-mile-an-hour speed in that section of roadway. So there's nothing there, such as a school in the nearby area, or such a thing as the elderly housing that would allow us to establish that safety zone and bring it down to 20, or keep it at 20.
Mm-hmm. So the fact that there are, a lot of trucks going quickly and bicycles down, that is irrelevant to how they define it.
Correct.
Okay, so it's a question of how many houses there are, or other kind of housing per square foot.
That's the way I read it, yes.
Mm-hmm. In some ways, I think it's too bad, because I think it's, so much of the movement these days is to try and make things more pedestrian friendly, more bicycle friendly. But I certainly understand, and I think particularly for suburbs in general, it's valuable for it to go in that direction. But I certainly understand the constraints that you're working within, and appreciate all the tremendous amount of work that you put into this.
Well, thank you for your comments. Yeah, we tried to interpret the rules a little bit more in our favor a while ago, and the state was late coming back to us to update their guidance to explain it. That our interpretation was a little bit more aggressive than what they had intended. So it's unfortunate.
So I'm just curious, I know it's late, but how old are their regulations? Are they something that have been in place for 20 years, or are they?
No, these are new. The business of the safety zones and allowing this, the municipalities to set speed limits within them was a relatively recent addition. But they didn't clarify the guidance to the municipalities at the time they put out the updated regulations. So we went to them and asked for them for some guidance when we were about to make our changes. And at that time, we didn't get any negative feedback. And then we made our changes. And then after that, they gave us negative feedback.
Well, thank you for your work again.
Yeah. All right, Joan Wogan, please go ahead and unmute yourself and make a comment. Joan, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. Okay. So my understanding was it'd be a discussion of the safety on Forestry tonight. I've been on here for 3 hours and nothing has come up.
Yeah, we are going to be talking about Forest Street. I apologize for the delay. This meeting was going to be a beast of a meeting. I knew it.
No, you had a lot of topics, I understand, but I'm not sure any of you understand, other than Todd and the police department, understand the issues on Forest Street. if you're not a resident.
Ms. Wogan, so on our agenda, under traffic measures, there's 3 bullet items. 1 is approving the new safety speed zones. 2 is approving new stop signs for Forest Street. And then 3 is introducing Mill Street options for discussion. So we're going to get to the Forest Street item as soon as I clear this item on the safety zones. And I'm sorry it's taken a long time.
I just want to be sure it'll be discussed. I will stay on board. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. Any other members from the public? I don't think so. I think we worn everybody out. There's a few people hanging in there. All right. Now I'm going to take a motion on the safety zones.
I move that we accept the proposed safety zones as described in the list presented by the police department.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, roll call vote. Mr. Round.
Yes.
Ms. Harrison.
Yes.
Ms. Jakes.
Yes.
Mr. Bodmer-Turner.
Thankfully, yes.
Mr. Bowling votes yes. Now let's move on to Forest Street. So, right.
Eli, does that include the reversions to 25?
Yes. I believe that's correct. Well, actually, technically, no. We just said safety zones right now.
I move that we move to revert to 25 miles an hour Pleasant Street, Walker Road, and Raymond Street for their entirety.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, Mr. Round.
Yes.
Ms. Harrison.
Yes.
Ms. Jakes.
Yes.
Mr. Bodmer-Turner.
Yes.
Mr. Bowling votes yes. Now we're moving on to Forest Street, I believe. Okay, so Greg, you want to outline the Forest Street proposal?
So as a preliminary step, the proposal is to create 3-way stops at the intersection of Forest and Herald and at the intersection of Forest and Mill. So those 2 intersections, which currently just have a stop on Herald and just a stop on Mill, would also require people on Forest Street in either direction stopping at those 2 intersections.
I'm sorry.
Comments? Questions or comments from the board first, and then we'll go to the public. Mr. Brown.
Nothing right now. I'm still mulling.
Ms. Harrison.
No comment.
Ms. Jakes.
I think it's a good idea.
Mr. Bodmer-Turner.
I strongly advocate both of these sign placements. Looking at the data that the police collected in their traffic studies last October and November, it was very clear that there needs to be a way of slowing down traffic and mitigating traffic on Forest Street. And I think that this is one way to do it. I think that there's the possibility of an additional proposal of changing some parking on Forest Street. But for now, let's just stick with the stop signs.
Members of the public. Ms. Wogan, did you have anything you wanted to say?
I do. I'm trying to find a way to raise my hand. Sorry. I only heard the part about Forest and Mill Street sign. I didn't hear the other sign on Forest Street. I'm sorry. You said 2 signs on Forest, 2 stop signs, right?
Harold Street.
Does
So
somebody have, I'm hearing
Excuse me, can I-
background noise, Eli.
I don't have any, I don't know. I don't have any. My question is, if I'm coming out of where I live on Ledgewood and I turn left, I'm stopping at Harold, which is maybe 20 feet. And for what purpose is that? There's already a stop sign at Harold. That does not stop the traffic pattern that is an issue. The speed is outrageous on Forest Street. I'm confused about that. If you can, I don't know where that piece came from. I can sort of understand the other one, but I don't quite get the Harold Street piece.
There are other cars coming down Forest Street that are traveling farther than Ledgewood to Forest.
No, I realize what I'm saying to you is they're coming from Mill Street, and the highest speed I see as I'm walking there constantly, people don't stop at the stop sign at the corner of Forest and Ancient County Way. They just go through it.
Mm-hmm.
The speed,
Mm-hmm.
nothing slows them down. I'm not quite sure that a stop sign where there's no intersecting traffic, I'll do anything to stop the speed. I will try anything. I'm not opposed to it. I just want to make sure it works. That's all I'm asking. That's my concern. What?
Todd, would a speed table work there? Is that a possibility? Someone has a TV on in the background.
Sorry, Becky, I missed your question.
I was wondering, is it possible to have a speed table at that area, Todd? Do you think? I mean, would that help at all, do you think?
Well, I've spoken to a couple of residents of Forest Street, and they both agree that since they painted, the DPW painted the lines, it has slowed some of the traffic down. I think the discussions with the DPW and Greg, these stop signs were one of the things that we decided to try to slow the speed down. So I'm not sure if a speed table would work necessarily, but when we did our speed study a year or so ago, the average speed, I believe it's the bi-directional speed, was 25.13 miles an hour, which I believe is what the posted speed is down there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chief.
I'm only basing it on my walking. The driving is one thing because I'm used to it, so I know where to watch for it. But to have two-sided parking and two-way traffic with a crumbling sidewalk makes it impossible for bikers or pedestrians to be safe on that stretch. That is one area. That's the only area I'm talking about between Ledgewood and Ancient County Way. Nowhere else. The speed is the speed. The speed is when they pick up. You can't really speed very well from Mill to Harold because of the way the road curves. If you drive it often, you'll see that it's hard to have any vision coming around the curves. When I walk it, I'm very careful not to walk into traffic because of the way the curve is. I have to go stand over the side by the golf course so that I can see myself both ways and be aware of all the traffic coming. All I'm asking is there anything other than those two stop signs being considered for this area?
Not at the moment.
No? Okay, thank you.
At this meeting currently, no. The thinking at this meeting was to put stop signs in and reassess.
Thank you.
Any comments or thoughts from the board?
I think it's reasonable to try the stop sign there and see what we end up with. That's, it sounds like the chief and the DPW have put a lot of time and thought into this.
I think Ms. Wogan's comments about parking raised the issue about whether it's safe to have parking on both sides of Forest Street in any stretch of it. Particularly when there's no sidewalk on one side and there's not much of a sidewalk on the other. So I think that putting the stop signs in place and reassessing is a good idea. But I also think that we need to take a careful look at parking that's allowed on both sides of that street. It's a very narrow street when you have parking on both sides.
Todd, it's a pretty heavily residential and closely built houses there, right? Is there a problem with off-street parking that requires people to be parking on the street? Because I don't think we can decrease parking if that's it.
I think in that general area, I think that, the main safety problem down there is the sidewalk. I think the sidewalk needs to be addressed before we decide to remove parking.
Mm-hmm.
But there is plenty of off-street parking, so it's just people just don't use their driveways.
Thank you.
I'm going to hold off on letting the conversation about parking go too far tonight because we're already running extremely late. And I'd prefer to take just the stop signs and we can follow up on subsequent measures.
Mm-hmm.
So can I get a motion to approve the 2 stop signs on Forest Street?
So moved.
Got a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Mr. Round,
Yes.
Harrison,
Yes.
Jakes,
Yes.
Mr. Bob Turner,
Yes.
Mr. Bowling votes yes. All right, now on November 2nd, we're going to talk about options for Mill Street. In the past, we've discussed, we have tried speed bumps there. We're not going to be discussing speed bumps on November 2nd, but we will be talking about the possibility of speed tables. There are challenges to those. We are also going to talk about speed monitoring signs. Those are less expensive and they have fewer challenges. Those are the 2 primary things that we'll be talking about on the 2nd. So if you have an interest in Mill Street, we will see you on the 2nd to talk about those 2 primary options.
Eli, does the board need to have a discussion or a vote on whether to request a speed study from the state on Route 127 Summer Street in the school zone and Sweeney Park area?
Greg?
So I think when we last discussed that, you wanted to have some data and some counts.
And we have that data.
Right. So we did not send it out to everybody, but you can certainly do that. I think, Jeff, that you got a copy of it.
Yeah, the rest of the board hasn't seen that data yet. So as far as that's concerned, let's take that separately, get the data out to the board members and we can discuss that on the 2nd.
Good, thank you.
All right, that's traffic measures. I want to move on. We're going to skip the liaison project updates. The consent agenda has the Board of Selectmen meeting minutes from October 5th. I was not there, So I am going to abstain from that particular vote. Anybody have any comments on the minutes for the October 5th?
It may be noted in the record that the meeting ended at 8:16.
Well done, Jeff.
Sorry, Eli, that's a low blow. I understand, but
Especially today.
Especially since you offloaded some of the things on this meeting. Oh. Yeah.
Nice.
All right.
Move to approve the minutes of whichever it was,
October 5th.
October 5th.
Can I get a
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, Mr. Round,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
Ms. Jakes,
Yes.
Mr. Bodmer Turner,
yes.
Mr. Bowling abstains. Correspondence. You all can read the correspondence section. Town administrators report.
I'll be quick here. A budget process underway for FY22. I'll just note that the governor's revised budget came out last week. I think people were people mostly pleasantly surprised. It was not as draconian as feared. We'll see how that all works its way through the legislative process over the next few weeks. So stay tuned on that. Construction updates. I'm sure people have noticed that the granite has gone up on the town green with the new honor roll. The goal is to get that in good shape for a Veterans Day dedication. So we're hoping they'll make good progress in the next few weeks so that on November 11th, we can have a dedication of that new memorial. Other work is proceeding as expected, and paving should start soon on Magnolia and Ocean and Raymond Street the next week or two here. Early voting has started. A lot of people have come in the first 3 days of early voting. Also, people are taking advantage of the mail-in opportunity. There's a drop-off box for people with ballots who don't want to mail them. They can drop them off a drop box in front of Town Hall on the steps. So that's going well and very, very busy. Encourage everyone to vote either now or on November 3rd. You mentioned the 40B. We'll have that here, the first presentation on the 29th at 7 p.m. and people can listen in to that. We still have the micro business grants available. October 22nd, October 23rd is the new deadline for the second round of applications. And more information can be found on the town's website. And we are working through some options on security for these virtual meetings. A few of the boards have had some challenges with so-called Zoom bombers interrupting. So we'll continue to work on ways to do that. One of the ways that we might pursue is to have people have to inquire for the login information rather than just posting all the details. So we're working through some options on that. We can talk a little bit about that another time. So that'll do me for now. Given the hour, we don't have to do the executive session in terms of tonight. It could wait for November 2nd meeting if people would prefer. They're important topics, but they're not time sensitive in the next 2 weeks.
Personally, I can handle the executive. Seems like probably be a good idea to do it. But I'll certainly be willing to accept a majority opinion from the board members. No official vote, just say yes or no. John?
I'm okay.
Ann?
Let's keep going.
Yeah. Becky said yes. Jeff?
I think as long as it's over by 11:15, I'm good.
Fair enough. All right, so we're going to do two things. We're going to do motion to move into executive session and then a bio break. So I'll take a motion to move into executive session, not to return to open session under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining for union contract police, and under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A8, to discuss preliminary candidates for town clerk.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Round,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
Ms. Jakes,
Yes.
Mr. Bodmer Turner,
Yes.
Mr. Bowling votes yes. 2-minute bio break, then we will lock the meeting.